Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Especially welcome to California from those of you from far afield or from other nations. To everybody, welcome to the Getty, and for all the developers in the audience, welcome to the very first Arches developer meeting. I was having a chat with Peter in the foyer this morning, and he asked, hey, does this feel like a milestone to you? And the answer is, yeah, it very much does feel like a milestone. I just want to take a few minutes to maybe put some context onto why we're meeting today, and then I'm going to give Nina a chance to go through some of the housekeeping items that we have in front of us for today and through the week. But I want to start, I guess, by acknowledging what I think by this point is a pretty common fact. Arches is a big, ambitious, and quite complex piece of software. And you all know that. Many of you probably know that better than I, in fact. But it's important, I think, to recognize that ambitious software without users or without people to support the software doesn't really help anybody. And we saw that early on. Right from the early days of Arches. One of the things that was clear to me and to Allison is that we needed to build a community, and not just a community of users, but a community of developers. What you see here is an email I sent back in February of 2012, basically saying, hey, Allison, you might want to talk to these open data strategy guys. They were really good at helping think through how to build a community, and not just a community of users, but a community of developers. I'll just tell you, it's as hard, maybe harder to build a community of people than it is to build software. And we've been at it a long time. And today is the culmination, I think, of all that hard work. It's really, really pleasing to me to see a group of you who have committed not just your time, but also, in many cases, your career to helping the community of cultural heritage professionals do a better job of managing, protecting, and preserving our shared cultural heritage. I always say it's meaningful work, and it helps get me up in the morning. It helps keep me interested and really excited about the work that we're doing. Hopefully that's true for you. Really, all I wanted to say this morning is I appreciate the fact that you and your organizations have put your trust in Arches, that you've bet on a piece of software, and that you've decided to become members of the community. Really appreciate that. We have 3 days together. I think it's really important for us to use that time efficiently and effectively. I guess my ask of you is to jump in and participate. There's going to be plenty of time for presentations, plenty of time for conversation. I think we have an opportunity to not only share knowledge amongst ourselves, we also have an opportunity to come to consensus on how to actually tackle issues. We're going to spend some time, in fact, doing shared code development. There's a lot to do, but don't miss the forest for the trees, and that's a chance to get to know your fellow developers, build connections, and think about how we as a community can be even more successful than we have been so far. We're going to end the proceedings on Friday afternoon with 2 basic questions. And they are, and I'll just tell you what they are right now so you have a chance to think about the answer. When we're done on Friday, was this useful and how could it be better? And then, should we do it again? And if so, when and where? So I guess, okay, 4 questions. But think about those 4 questions, because I do feel like answering them will be probably the best thing we do this week. I'm going to ask Nina to come down here in a moment and give us some guidance on the logistics. But before I do, I want to acknowledge the hard work of a couple people here, really important. So Cyrus, where are you? Stand up, please. The reason we're here is because Cyrus kept poking me, saying it would be really, really good to have some developers come together and talk about Arches. And he was persistent. So thanks, Cyrus. Nina, where are you? Stand up, please. The reason you're all sitting in your seats right now is because Nina organized the crap out of this effort. All the logistics, getting here, getting home, getting from security to this place is all thanks to Nina. Christine, at the top of the stairs there, thank you. The reason we have this specific venue is due to her hard work and coordination, and really thanks to the Getty for providing the venue. It was really, really generous of them to not only give us the space to have these conversations, but they have also generously provided our refreshments. So breakfasts and lunches are all, and the dinners tonight are all thanks to them. So appreciate all the support from the Getty, not just today and through Friday, but through all the years. So thank you to the appropriate person. I'm gonna say Allison, but Getty in general, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name's Teal, and today I'm going to be introducing you to a new feature I've been working on called the Workflow Builder. Before we begin, I would just like to give a little detail to myself and a little bit of background on the work I've been doing. So, I was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland. I've spent the last 3 years refining my skills as a software engineer for a company called Galvia Digital. Currently, the work I'm doing is for Flax and Teal, who's a prominent provider of arches technology and a sister company to Galvia Digital. And for the last roughly 8 months or so, I've been working on a project for the Historic Environment Division of Northern Ireland. Right. So firstly, I want to give a brief understanding of how workflows work in arches. Who here has used workflows in arches? Okay, good. So, quite a few of you understand the work that goes into making them. Who here asked their developers to make them workflows in arches? Good to see, good to see. What if I told you you can now create them yourself and save developers time? Behind me, you're going to see 3 files used to create a workflow. The one I'm scrolling down the longest there is the JavaScript file. It's quite long, and it contains each step, workflow step, and each card that should be rendered. And the second one there was the JSON file, and the third one was the HTML file. Excuse me. So that's the 3 main components of making a workflow, and it seems quite unnecessary, in my opinion, to write all that configuration data. For our project, we've been using the resource models provided by the Arches Her project. In the example behind me, we wanted to use the addresses card, which contains every field you might need to gather an address. But unfortunately for our case, we only needed a couple of these, specifically the street, city, postcode, and county. So each field we needed to hide required finding a unique ID to hide just one of these fields. And if we look back at the video, we can see that the blue text all stacked on top of each other is each field that we wanted to hide. And trying to interpret those IDs can be very difficult. So what's the problem? Why do we need a workflow builder? Well, speed. Using an user interface to build workflows will speed up developers and also give users the ability to create their own. So users can create fully functioning databases using the UI, so it makes sense that they should be able to build out a workflow for that database. It also reduces the workload on developers, allowing them to work on more complex features. There's no more finding unique random IDs, and I can't emphasize enough how much of a waste of time it is. At this point, I'm hoping I've given a decent understanding of what it takes to make a workflow and why a workflow builder will drastically improve how we use workflows in Arches. Next, I want to show you the builder and the features it provides in its current state, which is fully functional. You'll be able to find the builder on the sidebar along with the other Arches features. Once you've clicked into the builder, you'll be met with a list of the resource models you currently have active in your project, as well as the workflows that you have created with the builder so that you can begin editing them. And once you've clicked into either a resource that you want to begin with or a workflow you want to edit, you'll be met with the editor. Just want to cover some design decisions. So the main objective of designing this new feature was to keep it in line with the Arches workflows as they currently are rendered in the application. So we've got control buttons in the top left, similar to the normal workflows. Switching between steps is done using the tab bar at the top, and new cards appear in the list showing how they're going to render in the final workflow output. So configuration. These are the main configuration options of the workflow. You'll find the name. If the name should automatically generate the slug, which is defaulted to true, and if the workflow should appear in the sidebar. And what I'm doing in the video there is just running through that, publishing it, and then doing a quick refresh so that I can then show you that it does appear on the sidebar. Next, we've got creating steps, which is similar to how other workflows are. You click the plus button in the top bar, and that'll create you a new step. You can then configure the title, if the slug should generate, which is a recurring theme. You can also then configure the information headers, if the step's required, which means for you to continue on to the next step, you must complete data on that page. Next, we have creating cards. This works similar to creating a step, except you must scroll to the bottom of a step that you're currently on and click a plus button to create it. And once you've created a new card, you will select from the available cards that you have chosen, which is determined by the graph model that you've chosen at the start for this workflow. You can then select the resource ID path, which I recommend using the very first card that you've created for reasons I'm going to explain very shortly. So, publish, update, and export. These are the main controls you have when working with a workflow in the builder. Publish is going to register the workflow into the database. Update sort of explains itself. As you make new changes in the workflow, it's going to apply these changes to the database. And export will give you back a hard copy of the JSON file containing all the configuration needed. There is a bonus to this. Now that we have a single file to contain the entire history of a workflow and all the configuration details, if you wanted to move a workflow between two Arches projects, all you need to do is copy and paste the one file. If we backtrack a little bit to my example with the addresses, I explained that we had to provide all those IDs just to be able to hide the fields we didn't want. From the builder, we can now just click the toggle, the ones we don't want to see, which I've got shown behind me. We can also configure the tiles managed, which you can do using the radio buttons, which I'll show you here. So I've moved over to the right just to show that there was nothing there. And then when you configure it to be many tiles, you can see what that's going to look like in the final render of the output. The init workflow page, is probably my favorite part because it does save quite a bit of time. The init workflow page is used more often than placing the workflows onto the sidebar. So from the builder, we can now toggle whether we want it to appear on the in a workflows page. We can customize the name of that card, which is separate to the workflow title. We can also give a nice description for the user and customize the background color and the circle color to make it a bit more identifiable. And I'll just let that play out. So I've just went to the Init workflows page, and we can see that new workflow I've created up there. So, as with anything, there is some limitations or implementation details that I've had to sort of implement to get this to where it is. You could consider these workflows separate to a normal workflow because of these. So, the first is parent groups, but developers will probably know these better as parent tiles. The video behind me, is going to show the difference between location data, which has nested groups, and the activity names, which only has one single structure. And if we want to be able to use location data in a workflow, we first have to create the tile for location data, and then we can configure the additional tiles to that parent tile. So to solve this problem in the workflow builder, I've given quite a bit of control to the very first step, which now acts as almost a configuration step. I've been primarily using this with the system reference numbers to act as an initialization point for a resource. But what we've done now is the required tiles, the required parent tiles group now has a list of node groups that will be created, and then the lookup name for them. And this all happens in the background of the workflow builder, so it's not really a worry to anyone, which I find very handy. So I'm sure most of the developers are used to using custom components in workflows. They provide additional functionality to the workflow, and it is possible to use them in the workflow builder, although there's no user interface for this at the minute. I do have plans to possibly implement a dynamic importing system, which could solve the problem, but in the meantime, you can manually modify the JSON output and then update that into the database manually. But you will need to do a bit more configuration on the builder loader, which I'll be covering next. And another good thing about the JSON is in most places where you might want to provide additional functionality, the data you provide won't be overwritten by the builder. If you provide data that doesn't match the defaults, your data will take precedence over that. So next is the builder loader, which is how I was able to achieve the functionality of only requiring one JSON file. It acts as the entry point for all workflows built with the builder. It consists of a JavaScript file, which is the image on the left there, which is the, since the workflow HTML file rarely changes, it made sense to have a default to maintain that code, which is the top image on the right. And the JavaScript file is configured to get the workflow slug and the workflow step data from the JSON file and load that dynamically when you've accessed the workflow. And the custom part of the JSON files for a workflow is the component name and the component, which is what directs it to the loader on load, and then everything else is already stored in the JSON file ready to be taken out. So I want to go over some of the changes I've made to the workflow JSON, and if you've used these before, you've probably realized already that there's quite a bit of changes there. A lot more fields. Previously, this would have just been a show in the config, but now we have the graph ID, which stores reference to the original resource model that was used. I have plans to possibly allow for multiple to be used, because we actually had a use case for that in the HED project. The next will be the step config, which previously would have been kept in the JavaScript, but has now been relocated to here. And then also the init workflow config, which is the configuration data provided by the workflow builder, so that can then be loaded in as well. As with anything in development, there's always work in progress. And of course, the current state of this is completely usable, but maybe not as usable for some users who maybe don't understand how workflows work at the current moment. But for the last 2 months of the project, I have been using it, and it has been very useful in helping speed me up. The first is validation, which relies mostly on the importance of uniquely named fields. There will be several aspects of the workflows that require these unique fields, such as the workflow slug, the step names, and also the card names, which at the minute you can configure the slug and you can configure the step names, but not the card names. It's something I want to come back to. But there's no validation around these, is what I was getting to. So I also spoke about the options to publish, update, and export. So it's not a complete roster yet. The user really should have the ability to also unpublish a workflow, so they can take it out. And then they should also have the ability to export the init workflow JSON, because if that's had changes to it, it would be good that we can get access to that file as well. But in the meantime, you shouldn't worry too much, because the init workflow JSON config data is already stored in the workflow JSON, so we won't be losing any of that information. So that's the end of what I have to say today. I hope you all have enjoyed. These are some places you can find me, and if you're interested in getting access to the code, you can find that in the Flax and Teal Coral Arches project. There's also a fork of it on my personal GitHub, which is up there. And thank you. And there's a fun game you can play. Take a shot every time I said workflow. So, who's got the first question? If anyone. Yes. Sure.
Hi, cool. The required parent tiles, right?
Yep.
You define it when you configure workflow. When a user progresses through the workflow, when do they get generated? Is it at the beginning or when they go to the step?
It's at the very beginning. At the very beginning, when the resource for the system reference, which is the primary node group I've been using to generate or start the resource, those parent tiles will get looped through. They will get created, and then there's a lookup name provided. I didn't actually mention that, but there's a lookup name provided, which is how that tile ID is then pulled out and applied to the parent tiles of any node groups that require that parent tile to exist.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious, how come this isn't in the core repo yet? It's awesome.
Thank you. I'll try and get a PR as soon as I can.
Did you have to make any changes to core arches in order to support this?
That's a very good question. There is one hack, I guess. So if you're aware of how the top cards are populated in the workflow, which is how it's able to then pick out the cards that need to be provided, that is based on the resource that has been used. So if that resource then has parent tiles in it that have already been created, that's how it finds them. But to be able to load the parent tiles into the workflow builder, who doesn't have a resource created yet and therefore has no parent tiles, I have modified and overrode that endpoint It doesn't touch any core arches, but it does re-implement that the cards function, or the cards endpoint, to then loop through the graph as well, just before it gives me the cards back, and populate fake parent tiles, so I can then so you can then visually see them as well in the workflow.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'll just second Galen and say it'd be nice to see a PR. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. Yes.
I'll just shout my question. I was wondering, can it work over multiple models? I didn't understand.
Yes, not at the minute. I have plans to implement that because we did actually have a case of that at the HUD project where we needed to configure 2 resources at the same time. The code wouldn't be that hard to change. I just haven't got around to it yet. So most likely the graph ID field I have in the JSON will become an array of graph IDs, and then on the initial load of the workflow builder, it's most likely going to then grab all the node groups for both those graphs, so you can then select between which graph you want to use for that specific tile, and they'll most likely become another select drop down on the cards, so you can then see which one you're actually looking at.
One follow-up question.
Yep.
You've been into the guts of workflows. Are there specific changes that you might propose after doing this to optimizing how workflows work?
I'm sure there is, yeah. During my time working on it, yeah, there's definitely been a couple of things I've run into. Couldn't come up with any off the top of my head, but possibly a way to better identify which cards have been, or which tiles actually were created by a workflow, because we've had a case where we want to open workflows again, and it's been very difficult to sort of put them into the correct place that they came from. So that might be an idea as well. All right. Well, thank you.
Hello. My name is Paul Hudson. I'm a senior front-end web developer, and I work for Historic England. I'm here to talk about accessibility today. The next button isn't working. I just pressed the button. God damn it! So the 3 main points: the collaborative work that we've been doing in 4 stacks around the world, and the future. A little bit of background first, though. Basically, for all websites, it just means that we need to make sure all users are able to access, regardless of any of their disabilities that they might have. And we need to be as inclusive as possible in terms of accessing websites. There's lots and lots of information about this, so provided a link on there for further reading. Bit of background: I've been working for Historic England on arches on accessibility since 2019. It's been a lot of sweat, blood and tears. Not so much blood really, but bang my head. It's a UK requirement for government websites to be adhered to WCAG 2.1, and you might appreciate every single time there was a version update, my hard work down the drain. No, not completely, but obviously in new versions, layout has changed, structures, classes have been renamed, so it rendered some of the CSS not usable. So we had to rework it. And that was in 3 main versions, basically. So it was in 5, 6.1, and the recent 7.5. So as I've said already, it was mainly due to sort of structural changes on the page. So we just had to rework a lot of things. So to fix all this and stop this happening again in the future, we decided to do some lovely collaboration work to get all of this goodness into core arches. So it's just worth mentioning there is already some documentation on Read the Docs, and there's quite a bit of information on there. It just covers things like colour contrast, form fields, headings, links, keyboard usage, responsive web design for smaller screen widths, HTML validation. Now that was an interesting one because once the page is loaded, it produces a bunch of HTML. It was good just to check that what was being produced was valid and passed the tests. And obviously, a lot of screen reader and assistive technology. So it's also worth mentioning accessibility mode in Arches is turned off or false by default. If you want to make use of the accessibility mode, you've got to set it to true, basically. It doesn't really cover things like tabbing, responsiveness. It's mainly for fonts and colours. And all the other fixes are now in 7.5 core. I'll keep doing that, I'm sorry everybody. But yeah, it's brilliant. The future, well, a little bit there. Vue.js is coming. It'll be really interesting to see what accessibleness, is that a word? Is in there. I'm sure it is. And I mean, I know a little bit about it, but there's lots of plugins already out there that are already accessible, so it'd be good to see what that brings. So, collaborative work. Requirement was to adhere to version 2.1 of WCAG, which stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's 3 levels, A, AA, and AAA. AAA being the strictest. And we went for AA. We put together a team, Jonathan Alexi from Farallon, and myself, and Imogen from Historic England. Imogen's the accessibility guru tester. She knows everything about testing. She's very good. It's good to have her on board. We started work early last year. It was around the end of January where we had the kick-off meeting. We tracked all of our work on a project on GitHub, and we identified, fixed and tested well over 100 issues. There's quite a bit of work there. Some of those were incredibly complicated, that's just to say the least. We held weekly meetings and communicated over Slack as and when needed. And WCAG, just to say, it was created by the W3C. It's founded in 1994. It's just a set of international guidelines on making web content more accessible. So, some of the issues we come across were colour contrast. So that's like the background and foreground of colours on buttons and links and things. Header ordering, being able to tab to certain parts of the web page. Ensuring the site can be operated by keyboard only. Maps were exempt in this. They're not included under accessibility, thank goodness. We also had to make sure screen readers would read out all of the content correctly as well. And obviously make sure everything can be viewed on tablets, mobiles, and different devices. So there's some beautiful buttons. One doesn't pass and one does. So just for an example, the screen there is from like an online colour contrast checker website, which is used a lot. It's very helpful. You can put all your values in there and change things. And at the bottom, you can see the levels failing or passing. Obviously, in that left button, they all fail. On the correct button, what you can do is slide the luminance slider along, and you can see dynamically passing and failing down in the bottom. So when we were doing this, I mean, it's a colour, right? So while we were there, we made it AAA compliant, future-proofing things. Header ordering. So headings on a page, all headings should be correctly nested. There should be no skipped headings. And we found a couple of times headings were being used for styling rather than actually needing to be a heading. So you have to make sure really they're for structural purposes. The correct ordering assists screen readers because if you're somebody that uses that technology, you can skip headings on a web page using some shortcut keys. And upon the initial load of a web page, a screen reader will attempt to read out the page in order. So it's got to make sense. So there's an example heading usage. As you can see, it doesn't start at H1, starts at H5, and then magically skips to H2, and then misses H3 completely, goes to H4. So the correct way of doing it is starting H1, H2, H3, and so on, using the subheadings. So it was also very important to make sure we could tab to everything using the keyboard. There were quite a few instances where A links were used and there was no href attribute. Basically doing that renders that link untabbable. You can still click on it with a mouse, but you can't tab to it. So even if you just added href equals hash or void 0, makes that tabbable. Okay, so we just had to make sure you could also not only tab to it, but click it with the enter key, so action it. So just for an example, here's a clickable item on a page, a div. It's not normally a tabbable item, so you would be able to click on it, but you wouldn't be able to tab to it. So just a little example, if you want to make that tabbable, put the tab index 0, and as well as the on-click, do an on-key up, just to make it keyboard compatible as well. And Chantelle did something slightly more cleverer than an on-key up. We had, there's a plugin used, which is much nicer. I have a video. There's my mouse, I see it now. Okay, so this is just a video showing tabbing around using the keyboard and the outline of the element on the page that's got the current focus, because it's all very well to tab around, but you need to show the user actually where you are on the page. It's playing. Yep. So I'm just resetting the start of the page. So when you, on initial load, first tab press, you'll get a skipped content link. So if you click that, it will miss out all of the left nav and go into the main content, as you can see, and you can see things being yellow outlined. If we reset that, if we continue pressing tab, it will still allow you to tab through the menu to get to the menu, etc., all the sub-items. Okay, so you go across the top icons. You can open and close panels using the keyboard only. press escape to close any open panels. And obviously the map filter buttons as well. You can still tab to everything in those. Okay. Another video. Basically, this one was to show and demonstrate, just in the Chrome DevTools, how we've made it responsive. And obviously on smaller screen widths, the content's got to still be visible and stack. So, press on there. Right, let's play it. So you can see me dragging the screen and it stacks. So your results will be on the top, map on the bottom. So it goes from left to right, to top to bottom, left to right, top to bottom. And then if you keep going in further, you can see map filter buttons going at the top instead of on the right, because you're just blocking a lot of the map view. And we just had to make sure, because it was an absolute nightmare trying to make sure all the panels still open and show on the page at the same. So just for an example, if that was a mobile, landscape or portrait, you can still use it. Still open all the panels and close them, etc. Okay. Sorry, it's a bit different when you make this video and then talk about it when you're presenting. Yeah. There you go. Right. Why did we need to make it responsive? Well, there is a point on the WCAG guidelines, 1.4.10. It's all to do with reflow. And if you're really interested, you can click on the link and read everything about it. It does go quite in depth. But basically, just to summarize, we just had to make sure the whole website could be viewed, no matter what device you're using. Users may not have standard devices. They may have bespoke screens that certain screen resolutions and zoom levels. And also, another big thing we did was, if you wanted to zoom in up to 400%, we needed to make sure everything was still visible on the screen. What was happening, it was all going off to the side. You couldn't see anything. So that was quite a painful piece of work, that 400%, I can tell you that. Browsers have built-in functionality to change the font sizes. Initially, because they were all in pixels, the browser font size change didn't work. So what we did, we changed every single font size in Arches to use relative font sizing. So if you change the font to the top, it will affect everything in the whole site. So be careful of that, just in case. If you make it too small, it'd be really, really, really small. But anyway, it's all relative, so that's great. So just to iterate, it needs to work on any device and be visible. In 4 stacks around the world, there's quite a few, not everywhere, but Australia, Europe, Ireland, Israel, South Korea, United Kingdom, Ontario, Canada. There's other acts around the world, not necessarily laws. Title III of the United States, we've got an ADA, Japan, India, and some of the non-conformances may have penalties involved and may not. Depends where you are. Also in the United States, there is Section 508, Act, which was amended in 1998 to require WCAG conformance. It's currently set to 2.0 AA. There's other public sector laws, Canada, Netherlands, New Zealand, Taiwan. There's some countries that even keep their requirements in line with the latest WCAG requirements as well, so have to be really careful. Lawsuits can happen and have happened. So the best way to avoid that is make sure we adhere to WCAG requirements when we can. In the UK, public and private sector, and for US federal websites, it's also good to create an accessibility statement just to inform people what you've achieved, what is accessible, and perhaps what you've identified and aware of, and maybe what you're working on. And also at the end of this presentation, there's a list of sort of tools which I've used extensively to do all of this. They're really handy and helpful. I found a really nice quote on the internet. It says, think of making a website accessible a bit like creating a ramp into a shop front. I found the top 5 lawsuits, $6 million. Admittedly, it's not, not as much as stubbing your toe on a parked car and suing everybody all over the place. But still, there's a lot of, they're quite considerable sums of money at stake. It's not just about the money. It's about reputational damage. You can imagine us at Historic England, if we put something out in the public domain, you can imagine it on BBC News. Oh, they're not being accessible. This person here has been interviewed on, oh my God, you could just imagine, Jesus Christ. So it could be quite horrible. The future. WCAG, we've done all this to WCAG 2.1. There is 2.2, and it was released back in October. Not a huge amount of differences, luckily. And one of them, the passing one, has now been actually removed completely because a lot of assistive technology has improved drastically over the few years. It's no longer needed. There's obviously other ones, navigable, input modalities, predictable input assistance, but and there's lots of subheadings under these as well. So, and also WCAG 3 is currently in draft as well. So that's something to not or indeed look forward to seeing in the future. I mean, although there's going to be more work to come, obviously, we're not starting from scratch anymore. So 7.5, I'm going to do it again. Yes! Most of it's in there. So there's a list of tools I used. There was Chrome browser plugins mainly, but other browsers are available. The Wave evaluation tool is brilliant because you open a web page, press on the little plugin icon, and it tells you what's wrong and what isn't. And if you want to delve into the detail of exactly what point it is on the WCAG guidelines, you can click on it and everything. The Lighthouse is quite interesting because it's Google's offering. But it's not only a standard plugin. It could be integrated. I think some of our testers at HE have integrated it into our automatic test. Automation test. So that's very good. Our government tests government websites before they're released. So if we don't pass their test, we wouldn't be able to put anything live. And they use Arc Toolkit, which is a little bit similar to Wave. So it was quite handy to check that because we don't want to be failed at the first hurdle. Browser Stack is the only paid one we use. We've obviously got a corporate license for it, but it's absolutely excellent for, it's not emulating, it's actually using real devices. So they must have racks and racks and racks of iPads and Android phones and iPhone or whatever. Very clever. But it's very useful to check your website works on different devices. There's some credits there, some of the information I obtained. That's not me. It might be. I don't. And that's where you can find me. Any questions?
For the accessibility mode set, presumably there's some changes that are before right now, whether that's on or off in terms of like headings and that sort of stuff. So what is sort of included when that's off versus on?
Basically, at the moment, it's just colours. So if you've got that currently set to default, the false, off, if you run the wave accessibility checker, it will fail on the contrast. If you've got that set to true, I mean, there's not a huge amount of difference. It's just cosmetically, different shades of colours and things, but yeah.
So the structural navigation.
All the structural things, the tabbing, all the rest of it is in core now. Yeah.
Paul, thanks for all the hard work. I know it was a lot, and really good. There are design tools in Arches that aren't WCAG compliant yet, and I know we are going to have to worry about that. I'm wondering, based on your work, especially for support of different size mobile devices, do you have any patterns that you think would be especially good for implementing when we're talking about some of these more sophisticated pages in Arches, like the graph designer, for example?
Yeah, that's very hard, especially if you want to do that graph designer on a mobile phone.
Why would you?
It's going to be very interesting, but we may need to change the design of it. Maybe it might be better on a mobile device to be tabs that you can open and close and go back to it. Why any would want to do that, I'm not really sure, but you never know, and we've got to make sure you can do it. So,
is that true? Like, is there a way of saying that there's a particular portion of the application that doesn't have enough eyeballs on it to get around the requirement?
Yes, I mean, in your accessibility statement, you could identify areas that you know aren't, and if users still want to do that sort of thing, here's an alternative way of getting to that information. So I think as well, if you physically can't make the changes because it's unfeasible, just to provide an alternative way of getting to the same information. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm Alexi at Farallon, and I work directly with Paul on this last little bit, and I actually wanted to acknowledge and say it was such a pleasure working with you and Imogen, and yeah, it was a great time. It was a good learning experience, and seeing all these slides and all the screens of what we had to do kind of was giving me a little PTSD, a little flashback. And also, I think when you see it, you don't quite appreciate the amount of effort it takes to make things flow and resize and tab properly and just look and work as you would expect. And I think it's a lot harder to do that after the fact, especially. And I would really recommend, I know he has those links up for a few of those sites, like the ARC and the Wave plugin we used all the time, and your just built-in screen reader, and literally remembering to tab through stuff and just try to imagine not being able to use your mouse when you're making something, because it's a lot easier to do that and fix it right then rather than fix it after the fact, especially if you're doing like the structure of pages too, where it's then completely out of whack and you really have to refactor everything. I mean, it was a super learning experience, and it also makes you appreciate how lucky, at least I am, that I don't necessarily need to rely on those technologies every day. But in fact, after using them, especially tabbing, I was like, oh, this is actually quite nice. And so, again, just reiterate that. In the future, try to keep those things in mind and remind yourself to at least maybe check those, and that just helps everybody going forward. So thanks again, Paul and Imogen.
I had two questions. One is, you featured search in one of your examples, and I was wondering, can you tab through the select to dropdown as you're typing in a search term, and then you have to select one of the terms?
Select to, no. You could do certain things with the select to drop-downs. I had the same problem with chosen as well. And I know Alexi has had many headaches replacing select to with something called select woo, because it makes you go woo. But it's more accessible, and so thank you, Alexi, for doing that as well. That was a lot of hard work.
I mean, I'll also point out, because it reminds me, the view work coming, or the view framework that we're going to start migrating toward. There's another kind of library called Prime View, and it's built on View. And one of the reasons it was chosen, I think we kind of started to kind of focus on that library, was the fact that accessibility was one of the things that it specifically points out as being integrated in all these components that they provide. And so obviously that's a huge thing, especially for things like drop-downs, because the select blue is not a traditional drop-down, it's not an HTML drop-down, right? It's manufactured to look like a drop-down, so it has accessibility issues because of that. But Prime View handles for a lot of those things, so that's one of the reasons.
That's great to know. Yeah, and super exciting that we're going to be, have accessibility built into our components. One other question is, on search, you were demoing the responsiveness on mobile devices, and I was wondering, number one, as somebody who's privileged and is not visually impaired, how do people with that disability use map interfaces? And can they use it in arches? And also, can they use the map filter to draw points and polygons?
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to. I think, again, you would have to provide that information in another way, because what's the, I forgot the name of it, the one, the one with all the bits, the tree thing? Yeah, I mean, that again, you can't really make it accessible. So we can do our very best to try and make it as accessible as possible, but if it gets to a point where we can't, we'll just have to, again, try and provide that information in an alternative way.
And
for the related resource, for the map at least, we've provided the same sort of functionality through the side panes. So you can tab through and at least listen to or observe the relationships through those side panes that a sighted person can see through
Yeah, I mean, generally maps, mapping plugins and things like that aren't covered by accessibility. But
And then aside from the accessibility question, just making the search responsive, I was wondering if when you click the map filter to show one of the like workflow card things, does that cover the entire map? If I'm on the smartphone, like, will I be able to actually draw in a polygon map filter on the map if does that cover the whole map, I guess?
I don't know. I'll just start my local environment app. No, it doesn't. I think obviously if you go down to mobile size, yes, it will cover the map. So you'd have to close the panel to see your changes. Yeah. Any more? No? Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Jana, and I work for Flax and Teal, based in Belfast in Northern Ireland. Thank you. Perfect. I am not a developer, so I am your option to rest your brain from all the code and all the technical stuff. You can have some sleepy time if you want now. But I am information scientist, so I try my best to be a good bridge between the client and the developer. And I'm definitely making our developers exercise the right of, explain it like I'm 5, please. So I can definitely make sure that I understand what they're doing and vice versa. Right, so I'm here to introduce digital transformation. This one is for a large public sector body in Northern Ireland. It's a Department of Communities, specifically the Historic Environment Division, or HED. I'm just going to call it HED from now. Please don't make me say that several times over. So we started in autumn 2022, and it's been split into 3 different parts, or 3 different phases, if you want, to make it a bit more structured, because the digital transformation in its whole is very large. So, shall we get into the trilogy part? Maybe. Right, one more thing before I start the slides properly. So the digital transformation is not only for the historic and existing data, but it's also for everything what's coming. So it's your day-to-day data management and making sure all the new records are properly recorded as well. Right, in a galaxy far, far away. Now, what you see on the screen now is the current user interface. That's the one with the red background, and also the internal look into the databases from the second survey in buildings, and one of the records, how it's been viewed from the internal point of view in the middle. Now, I think it might be fairly easy to have a little bit of a giggle in terms of how these look to us now in 2024, but I also think it's really important to stress the fact that this has been bespoke and custom-built database and the software, and it's been serving for well over 20 years. So I think it's doing pretty well, to be fair. It's also a vast, vast depository of data. So you have everything there, from images to text files to map overlays, the polygons, bibliography as well. All of that has been stored there and has been managed through there. Right. So, phase 1. This is a little bit of an overview, mostly for me not to forget anything, fingers crossed, but it's nice to give you some bullet points as well to sort of try to follow my rambling, I suppose. So, phase 1. Now, this is where I had the most fun. I'm not saying I'm not having fun now in phase 3. But you know how it's the rule with a favorite child? This is the kind of thing for me. So, this was a very humbling experience, because I was given a drive with approximately 400 different tables on it, connected in one way or another to each other. And it was just go, play, make the sense of it. Luckily, I had John, who was here, so he was a very good help from the internal point of view, from HED, so he was always there to validate anything that came across my mind. I was like, is this right? I was like, yes, it is. Cool. But now Arches is very flexible and very customizable. That's the main point of it. But it's not the bespoke software that has been specifically built for needs of one institution, if you want. So since we were up against that, we had to make sure that we do the mapping 100% right and we can accommodate everything we possibly can. And we're not going to lose any data because that's one thing you definitely don't want to do. Right, so most of the data were your CSV files. So that was very easy for me to convert into your Excel or anything what the mere mortals can read, not just the machines. But we also had a lot of maps, and these maps included a lot of polygons, a lot of bullet points, and everything that essentially gave you the map overlay and the pink wash of different monuments and all the records. So we used Jupyter Notebook to open these and have a look through them to properly see what we have to accommodate. Now, another very good point in Arches is the fuzzy dates accommodation. We had a big play with this, especially when it came to bibliography, since not all your publications are newspapers with a specific date, month, and a year. A lot of them just have a year. So we had to make sure it's not going to be the 1st of January, 1996. It's just going to stay 1996. So that was a very good play as well. The bibliography was a lot of manual cleaning. That was 3 months of my life, but I have to say I did enjoy it because it gave you a good inside point of view of the vastness of it, because the bibliography, I believe it was 14,000 individual records, and I had to do that manually, so that was fun. Thank you, I'll take that. Yeah, I think my eyesight went definitely worse after that. But we've mapped all our hearts out and all the tables, everything connected, everything has been validated by the client as well. So to give you a little bit of a insight, so the lower screenshot, that's our mapping. So there is method in the madness. Essentially, every single field from HED database had to be connected to the Arches field, and also allocated the node group ID and node ID, just we make sure that everything connects very nicely and it's going to be in a proper field. So we also had to make sure that we understand the fields individually, like is it a number, is it a text, is it a string, and all these little bits and pieces to be determined. And also phase 1 meant that we had our dev site up, or the dev development environment, if you want. So we had a good chance to test everything that we've mapped. Like, is it actually working? Can Arches actually read it? Is it sitting where it's supposed to be sitting? So on the left-hand side, up, you can see the first 305 files that we tried to upload and try to see how it's reading, how it's looking, and also we did a lot of testing on that site just to make sure that it's up and running and it's all good to go. Now, when it comes to validating all of this and making sure that we definitely have enough room for all the data, that became another puzzle, if you want. Specifically when it comes to the buildings database, buildings and second surveys. So that one is huge in its own understanding. But at the same time, what we had is roughly about 13 different date fields alone that we had to accommodate onto the Arches platform because we couldn't afford losing any of the data. And that database is very detailed. It has everything from date of the survey to when the survey was requested, when the site was scheduled or descheduled, or when was the front picture taken. And all of that we had to preserve to make sure that it goes onto the new platform. So what we actually did Now I'm getting a little bit into the technical side, so if you want to follow up on this, I'm going to point you towards Phil, who sits in the second row here, and also Taylor, who already did lovely workflow demonstration for you. But we created a new resource model. So that was, we call it Monument Revision, and it's specifically tailored to the building database and for the second survey purposes, mostly because you have a record, but you need to update it, you need to add more details to it, or you need to just make sure that it's updated, essentially. So what happens is a process of creating almost a clone of it, making sure that it's being signed off and approved, and a new record is created on the top of that. As I said, developers are your guys for this point of view. Now, so we went through the New Hope phase. We're going to get to the Empire Strikes Back. So I already mentioned Taylor, who did a fantastic job with a workflow builder. But before we got to have that, we had to know what we're doing with the workflows. So there were lots and lots of workshops with the client, with all the teams, with all the parts of the HED community as such, to make sure that we understand the teams, we know what their needs are, and we can custom build the workflows for them. So Arches provides good bricks, but we need to make the structure actually work for them. So as I said, it was a very specific process per every department, because everybody works differently. We actually came across maybe a bit niche issue here, which was a clash of terminologies. So what's a consultation for Arches is not a consultation for the client. And that was one of the big head-butting experiences, maybe. But we managed to work around it. We managed to rename stuff and just make sure that it's not just a template that's thrown at the customers, but we can actually make the most out of it for them. Right. Yay. So, examples of the workflows that have been built. Right. I did speak about some of it already, but merge heritage asset, that's a good one. So merging, you might ask, what do you need to merge? Why do you need to merge anything? Well, the HED up until now worked in a separate databases for each department. So you had your buildings, you had your monuments, you had your industrial heritage, and they didn't talk to each other. They lived as a separate entities. And what we're doing now is taking all of it and putting it into one platform, into one home. So the duplicates are inevitable. To give you maybe a bit vague, but a hopefully good example is that you have a bridge, which lives in the industrial heritage database, but it's also a very pretty bridge and a very old bridge. So it's also in a monument. And now you have two records when what you want is just one. You want one record that's going to tell you that it's both of these things. You don't want two records that are going to just live separately in the database. So that's what we're trying to do with the merge heritage asset. But again, same as for the previous workflow, is that it needs to go through the sign-off process. So it's not just a member of staff doing all these changes, it's definitely going through sign-off process through the senior staff. So you have your revision, you have your sign-off, and then you have a new record. And to be fair, in the sense that goes for most of the workflows, because it's never just one person dealing with most of the data or the issues. You always have an admin team, and then you have the team of the archaeologists, architects, whoever it is who's in charge of the proper taking care of the data. So there is a chain reaction, if you want. So we need to make sure that we have alerts that come up every time one person finishes their work, to make sure that the admin team gets pinged, and then they can create a letter to send out anything what's important. And once they do that, they also alert back the, let's say, the excavation team, who's going to make sure that they're finishing off their work. When it comes to this level of permissions, I'm going to point you to Phil, because he's in charge of that. And I believe he has a good talk about it ready as well. No worries. Anytime. Right. So, the final episode, The Return of the Jedi. So this is phase 3. We are there now. It's slightly overlapping with the finishing of the phase 2. As it always does, phase 1 ended up overlapping the phase 2 as well, because it all, as I said, it's just validation on the validation on the validation, make sure we have everything, we're not losing everything. So, again, the top one is your current user interface from the public point of view, and the lower one is our new home. It's our new home for all the HED data. At the moment, it's only for testing, so don't get too excited. You don't get to get your hands on it yet. But we have exactly 11 working workflows on it now and exactly 0 data. So the migration will begin shortly. Just we need to make sure that it's stable. We're happy with it. The client is happy with it. They're doing testing currently for the workflows as well. But also, we're doing testing and debugging and some more debugging and some testing and debugging again. And it's just this loop of process for now. But we're getting there. We're definitely getting there. So hopefully you'll get to see it. You'll get to see it soon. Any non-technical questions? Yay.
So non-technical, the merge workflow?
The merging workflow, was that to merge two instances of two different resource models or of the same resource model into each other?
No, it's for 2 records. So it's for 2 resources, if you want, or 2 records. Let's say it lives in 2 separate databases. Once we're going to merge it onto one platform, it's going to come up under presumably very often the same name, same location, just as 2 different entries. So we want to avoid that, or we want the client to have a way of dealing with that once they see all the duplicates. So it's one resource model, but it's just making sure that it doesn't live twice on the platform.
How did you figure out the rules for that, like to determine what would happen?
We're not. That's all internal job for HED. So it's just a tool for them to manage that. We're not doing the merging for them.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. Nice.
So how did you come to the decision to use arches?
It was we wanted to use open source for this particular work, and also the client wanted to use the open source. So it just came to the agreement that this is happening on the Arches platform, and especially since it's for heritage management data, it just makes sense. And it's just, there is such a strong map feature to it as well, that it's exactly what they need, because they have so many different map overlays and polygons, and just the management of it and creating of a new record, it's very intuitive in Arches.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your presentation, and
thank you.
Thank you so much for doing that work on the bibliography. That sounds like a lot. Just wanted to ask more about that whole extract, transform, load kind of process. And were you running into issues where the data that you were working with was so messed up, or was really difficult to reconcile with the models that you're using in Arches, or were there interesting tensions that made that harder than and the last question about that is, was Arches able to support everything you needed to do, or did you have to use a lot of other kinds of external tools before you actually did the load into Arches?
Right, thank you. It's a very loaded question. I'll try to answer the best I can. So yes and no. Arches managed to accommodate a lot of it, but at the same time, that's exactly why we created the monument revision, because that just meant it supported a lot more and a lot better what we needed to do. So specifically the second survey, again, just because it's such a rich database, and there's so much of the data in general. None of the either activity or consultation were able to accommodate all of that. So that's why we ended up blending. I'm sure somebody's going to correct me here, but I'm pretty sure it was monument, consultation, and activity, all three blended together to individually map and individually connect the specific fields that we needed it. So again, that was quite a lot of manual work, but I'm sorry, Kanika's not here, but she was the mastermind behind it. So she managed to make sure that it's all mapped exactly where it needs to go. When it comes to bibliography, it wasn't even an issue as such, but what happened there was that once we got the CSV file for it, essentially the whole bibliographic statement was in one cell. And since Arches can support bibliography in terms of making sure that you just put in your author, volume, year, page in the individual fields and it spits out a good bibliography statement for you, we wanted to do that for the client, but there was no way of automating it. That was the problem, so we had to split the individual fields into separate columns. So what I've done was that I created the columns in a table exactly how it's in Arches, so it was just fairly straightforward process afterwards. But there was a lot of manual cleaning in it as well. But yeah, that's my little librarian heart happy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Or I'm happy. Oh, yes. Go for it.
So I noticed in phase 2, when the Empire was striking back, there were workshops involved. And I'd like to know a little bit more about what you discussed in the workshops. Was that getting the client to talk through their business process and then transforming that into thinking about how to turn those into workflows? Or was there more to it than that?
So the main idea of the workflows workshops was to make sure that we understand how they work and what they need in each workflow, because it needs to work for them. It's not just the fact that the workflows are there and it's a good feature. They need to be able to use it, and it needs to be very straightforward and as similar to their current process as it gets. So it's fairly easy and smooth transition, mostly for the staff. A lot of the workflows, what we were coming up against is that they were mostly working in Excel sheets. So it wasn't exactly like a database we could just transform. It was more of making sure that we understand the processes from one spreadsheet to another, how that chain reaction goes, so we can implement it and make it into smooth workflow. So it's a lot easier than going through sheets and just updating them.
So have you done usability testing with the client?
Sorry?
Have you done usability testing with the client?
They're doing it right now. So I feel like the frog in the water is slightly getting warmer and warmer. So I'm just expecting the feedbacks to keep coming in next month, essentially.
Good luck.
Thank you. We're good. We're good. Yay!
Hi everyone. I'm Chantelle Smith. I'm a senior software developer from Historic England, and I'm going to speak to you today about that wonderful hot topic that we all love, AI. So, to give you a little bit of a background as to how I got here, generative AI, is something that's really quite interesting, and lots of people in Historic England have been wondering how we can harness its abilities to make our work easier and to make us be able to do the things that we do faster. So in October 2023, the developer team at Historic England had a hackathon event, and basically we're a Microsoft house, so we have access to Azure AI services, and it was basically a case of 3 days, go and play and see what you can come up with. Which was great. It was great fun. And we did split into smaller teams, so we could all look at different elements that Azure AI services would allow us to sort of modify and use our data to present it in a useful way. So the team that I was part of, you can see the back of my head here, but we've got my colleague Paul and also Rob, who isn't here today, and along with our colleague Kingsley, we were looking at how to use the vision services to take an image and to bring back useful text data that we could then use to generate alt text, which is a requirement for accessibility, and also tags so that you could do a textual search for an image and be able to find it. And therefore use it if you have things like visual impairments, or if you want to find lots of different images that are all of a similar type. So having done that, we found that we were using an out-of-the-box AI service just to make things fast. We found that it wasn't perfect, but it did come back with some interesting results, and we did think that it was worth pursuing later. Me in particular, I definitely wanted to play a bit more. So I went up to my line manager, Andy, and he went to his, and I got a week to go and play and see whether or not we could use AI within Arches to make things, to generate that sort of alt text, and also to see if we could use tags and integrate it into the search capability within the application. And this is very much a prototype, it's still a prototype, but it was just a case of seeing whether we could do it. So be extending or creating new elements. So in order to get this all working, I had to create a new view model, which was following the pattern of the file widget JS view model. I basically lifted the code and stuck it into a new one and added a little bit of extra so that we could use tags. Also created a new widget, a new function, and extended the file list data type. So first up was the view model. Is Jacob here? Hello, hi Jacob. So Jacob put together for the image file metadata information into the actual file, which was great. That was like, oh wow, there's something that I was thinking of doing and it's already there. There's a place for it. So in addition to, you can see the ones in black, that's alt text, description, title, and attribution. I basically added tags to the metadata structure so that we could then store the tags that generated by the AI against the image itself. I'm sure there's a neater way of doing that actually than just kind of grabbing the code and sticking it in, but I might need to come back to that and ask for some ideas. So having got that view model, we're then able to reference the view model within the view for the widget. And the aim of the widget was to be able to save the tags, but also to view them and to edit them manually as well, using the same mechanism as alt text. And you can see that I've created what I've called file extended widget. That's the, on the left-hand side, you've got the configuration, and then on the right-hand side, you've got what it looks like. So it's basically the file widget with an extra bit stuck in, which is highlighted in red. Having created the widget, we can then move on to the thing that I was looking forward to, because I like writing functions. I'm not sure if I should admit that. I might have just created a rod for my own back. But yes, I do like writing functions. So this would be the main mechanism that you would use to take the image, send it to the AI service, get the information back. And it's called, it just rolls off the tongue, you know, image, alt text, and tag generation with generative AI. See, I didn't mess that up at all. Basically, we've got 4 elements that are the input for the config. You've got your image node, so this is limited to the nodes that you can add images to, so you don't end up having to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll to find the node that you want. You've also then got the AI service URL and the AI service secret key. So as I said, Microsoft House, we're using Azure AI. These are the things that are needed to be able to access the service. If we wanted to use a different AI service that needed other information, this would need to be altered accordingly. And basically putting it into the config means that we can hand this over to an administrator on the system. They don't need to be a developer, and they can plug in the the service endpoint and the secret key, and makes our life easier. Let's go for it. And finally, we've got the concept collection. Now, what I thought would be a good idea is that the tags, you don't know what's going to come back. It might come up with something that's useful and something that is maybe not relevant to being stored in your Arches instance. So this means that any tags that come back will then be filtered against a concept collection held within the RDM. And here we've got the fish thesaurus of monument types. So that's the monument types that are looked after by our data team. I can't remember what they're called. They keep changing their names. They used to be Heritage Data Management, but I know that's not what they are now. So how the function works. You take your image and you save it. And once that's saved, it streams, the logic streams the image up to the AI service, which is held at Azure. That then analyzes the image. Again, out of the box, we're using an out-of-the-box service here, so it's got a certain load of things it brings back, like description and tags, and there are other things that I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's quite a lot of it that comes back. And it chucks it all back to Arches. There's then logic to grab just the caption. Now, the caption will be used as the alt text, and it is part of the description object that's brought back. So we're just choosing to use the top caption. I'm sure that if we wanted to make it more complicated, we could give people the option of choosing which caption that they wanted to use, but prototype, let's make sure that it works first. And also tags. So once that all is in the logic, it saves it against the metadata for the image file and saves the time. And hopefully, if it all behaves itself, we have our information as we want it. Now, it's all very well to sit there and store tags, but we want to make them useful. So the logic for being able to add terms and in the drop-down when you type into the search, and also bring back the results that meet those terms is within the file list data type. And rather than taking the whole thing and putting it into a new file, we've basically just kind of overwritten, we've pulled in within the class the standard, the default file list data type, and then just changed the get search term and the append to document so that the tags are stored as a comma delineated string. So the logic within get search terms splits them out by comma and then adds them to the terms that are used to populate the drop-down and the quick search. And similarly, the tags are also split in append to document, which then is added to the Elasticsearch and allows them to be used to bring back things into the search results. So let's see it in action. This is the image we're going to be uploaded. It's one that I took several years ago. It's the Church of the Holy Rood in the Lawn, Swindon. It's a Grade 2 listed building. And if you really want to find out more about it, that's the official list entry on the National Heritage List for England. Because doing a live demo is never a good idea. I may have learnt this through experience. We're going to watch a little video that I did. Here's one I prepared earlier for anyone who understands Blue Peter references. Yes, good. So again, I talked through this and then while recording, and so it might not, there might be points where I pause. And there's the microphone. So what we're going to do is I've created a very simple resource model called image test. We're going to put in a name just so that I know which one we're looking at. That's just a string, and it looks exactly the same as the out-the-box file widget at the moment. But what we're going to do is we're going to select our file. We're going to choose the church. You can see that we've got nothing in alternative text. There's nothing in tags. But when we hit add, basically, that image is now being streamed up to the AI service. It is analysing it, and it has brought back a caption which we're using as alternative text. We populated alternative text with a stone building with a cross on top. Now that's great, that's a good starting point, but we know that it's a church, so why don't we change it manually to church? If we save it, the AI service it's not sent up to the AI service because there's already something in there. So basically we're not overwriting what we actually want to have in there. But the thing is that having that initial caption means that people aren't sitting there going, what on earth do I put in for alternative text? It gives them a starting point so that they can make it into something that they actually will find useful. The tags, these are the ones that have been checked against the concept collection that is stored within the RDM. We've got building, grave, arch, cemetery, church and stone. But we also saw there was a cross in the image, so why don't we see if cross is one of the terms that we can add? We'll save it, have a look at the tags. Cross is within the concept collection that we have specified back in our configuration of the function. But there was also grass, so why don't we see if grass is in there? Grass is not a term within that concept collection, so it isn't saved, it just basically gets thrown out the window. And so it does mean that we've got useful terms that we can make sure people aren't putting in things that aren't going to be useful or that we don't think will be useful. If we go to the top of the report, we can see that we've just got a string of the terms at the moment. If we right-click on the image and inspect, we can see that the alt text, it's working as out of the box as it should do, but it's got the alt text that we have generated using the AI. So a stone church with a cross on top. That's what we want to see. Very happy with that. I'm sure I was waffling more as I was practicing this and recording the video. I'm very good at waffling. So we've got everything in there, that's great, but it's not any use if we can't search to find the things we want to see. So we've got 3 images, and we knew that one of the tag terms was church, and it is coming up in the drop-down, and we can see that it's brought back one resource, which is the one that we've just uploaded. So we're just seeing how, you know, it's a very small change on the surface, but it can be harnessed to be really powerful. And I don't think that this is like the end. This is very much the beginning, I think, of how AI can be used to make things faster, give people ideas of what information that they want to put in. That's all exciting stuff. Right, what am I doing? It has stopped, okay. So as I said, this is just the beginning. I think within Arches, we've just got the tags displaying as a text string. It would be really nice to be able to link through to the concepts. Now this is within a data type, so I don't think that it would be very good idea to put concept within you know, the widget within the component within the file component. I think I'd have to ask people who know better than I do. But even if it's just a link, it then means that if people go, oh, well, you know, what's a megalith? I know what a megalith is, but not everyone does. They could then click on that link and it would take them through to the RDM, and they would be able to read the description of what a megalith is. So it just makes it more joined up and easier to access information within the application. At the moment, the searching for tags is just within the quick search. The advanced search is configured within the data type configuration, and I ran out of time to really look at how we might be able to overwrite that. I wanted to still just kind of use the file data type, not create a completely different data type, because, you know, it's just reworking the wheel for a lot of it. So it'd be really good to find a way of just being able to alter that that configuration if this is kind of put into a project without necessarily putting it into core. But it would be great to be able to search for tags, because at the moment there doesn't seem to be a way of searching for images within Arches in the advanced search. So you could just build really useful, complex searches if we could get that into the advanced search. At the moment, with the configuration, you've only got one concept collection that you can use to check the tags against. It might actually be useful to check against multiples. So for example, we had monument type, but if you've got intertidal zones, so just sort of where the sea meets the land, you might also want to be able to check maritime craft types, so being able to put, kind of join the list all together so that you can search for those terms might be more useful. At the moment, again, prototype, we're looking at just having one image node, but you might have several image nodes across your resource model. So it would be really useful to be able to configure the function to be triggered by those. And you might want to have different concept collections for different nodes. So there is a function that I have written that kind of stores multiple separate configurations. Doing something like that would be quite useful so that you can have more flexibility in how you get this all working within a single resource model. The code at the moment is within a project because you've got the view model and you've got a requirements file to get the Azure service libraries coming in. It would be probably something worth looking at is to see how we can make it into a package, make it packageable so that people can just pull that in rather than having to pull a whole project in. But there may be modeling implications, so I'd have to kind of make sure I don't do things in a way that is not helpful because we want to make this as helpful as possible. So that's just within Arches. The actual AI service, as I said, out of the box, there's limitations on how we can get it to bring stuff back. So there is a possibility of making a heritage-trained custom vision model. It's another mouthful to speak. And so that we can generate more heritage-specific alt text and tags. So you train it up so that it sees things like rock carvings and it knows that it's that rather than it's a rock. Or, as we found with the Mary Rose, which is a Tudor warship that sank off of the Isle of Wight, show the wreck of the Mary Rose, pile of wood. Technically correct, not quite what we're looking for. So just to make it a little more useful. And also possibly seeing if there's a way of getting the tags back and then using that to enhance the caption that is then used for the alt text. So that's very much seeing that side of the technology and how useful and how extended it can be. There's a lot of, we could use it to bring back caption from an image and enhance a completely separate thing like the description node. So it's a case of trying to make it as flexible as possible and try and take the load off of the people who are actually entering in the information so that they can focus on the things that really do need the human consideration because there's always going to be more records than there are kind of hands on deck to, after the Mary Rose maybe, yeah, hands on deck to sit there and get the information into the system so that it can then be looked at by the people who need the information. I think that's about it from me. You can find me, you might see if you're making changes to Arches core, you'll see me pop up as C Smith HE, so say hi. And that's the Historic England GitHub repo. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. If I don't know the answer, I'll find out the answer. So thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, first off, I mean, I think that's super cool. I've also been thinking about how AI could be leveraged, and this is such a great kind of initial foray and a very, you know, like you said, this is the first step.
Yes.
For sure. But such a clever use of AI and, you know, as it has that tie into accessibility, which also I think is quite interesting because, of course, nobody wants to enter alt text because that's such a pain. And this is such a great way to alleviate that. And also I love that it's, you know, that you get that instantaneous gratification of of seeing it come back to you and deliver something right away. I kind of was just, before you demoed that, I thought, oh, you'll save it and it'll save up and you'll, eventually then have to retrieve the thing and look at it. And so the interaction is really nice. I did have a quick question about the tags.
Yeah.
Are you just, the tags it brings back, was that just luck that these things happen to match up with your collection?
Yeah.
Or is there kind of some fuzzy matching going on to kind of like, well, it says medieval church, we have church, okay, we're going to use church?
No, it's an exact match of terms within that. So,
oh, it is, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
so if it came back with medieval church, if that's within the collection, then it'll pick it up. But it won't sit and go, okay, it's come back with church, therefore we'll add the child
I see.
concept at the moment. Who knows what it will do in the future.
Right, cool. Well, very clever anyways, and yeah, great work.
Thank you.
Thank you, that was really awesome. I was also sort of wanted to ask a follow-up about like some of the language issues, and so that you're matching with the fish vocabulary,
yes.
I guess, right? So I was also thinking about, a lot of like Arch's instances, especially in cultural heritage, would have a lot of very technical kind of language in that. And maybe one of the accessibility issues is also the sort of language that we use to describe heritage and monuments and things. And so do you see a potential for maybe using some of this to sort of bridge the sort of normal spoken language of everyday language with some of the data that you're keeping and using an AI as a sort of an intermediary between the technical advanced search in Arches and a sort of like a more of a prompt kind of a way of accessing some of this information?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about it, but I think that's where the custom model would come in. You would teach it to use, technical language, but also simple language, not simple, but everyday terminology. And I think that's where you might be able to get that bridged between the technical and the everyday. But I think that's time for another week of playing around with tech.
Thank you.
Oh, hello.
Hi, really awesome presentation.
Thank you.
And I want to second what Alexi said. I think it's so amazing that you're, feeding two birds with one scone by increasing accessibility and also adding functionality. I wanted to ask about the search implications for the tags. So it makes total sense to me that, you're just sort of creating terms for them and adding that to the document. If you were going to take it a step further, I mean, you did mention, adding sort of like an additional functionality, advanced search, to be able to say specify by tags in an in-file node facet. What ideas do you have for taking this further to enhance the search experience and to make this data more rich?
I mean, I do wonder if, as part of the advanced search, rather than having people type in a string, if the terms that are available, if the concept collections that you configure within the function might be kind of pushed through so that you then get a drop down of terms that you can choose. I think that because people might type in a term and they put it all lowercase, if it's looking for that text, it might not find it if it's camel case or completely uppercase. So I think that making it as easy as possible to get the correct term and the correct spelling and everything, if a drop down based upon the concept collections might be a way of doing that. But yeah. Hi, Dennis.
Chantelle, that was cool. So I'll just pile on and say it's super awesome, and it seems like you got a lot done in a week.
Yeah.
That's really amazing.
Thank you.
I have two questions, if I might, and I think they're probably both pretty speculative.
Yeah.
The first one is there, are you aware of an AI that instead of passing it an image, you could pass it, say, a spectrum, like something that comes out of an instrument, and ask it to give you an interpretation of it?
I'm not aware of it, but I think that's because we're using there was a specific service. It was the computer vision service. I don't know if there are other AI services out there that will analyze kind of spectrum data instead. It's definitely worth having a look.
Yeah, that would actually be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
The second question is also, I think, somewhat speculative. So you created an instance, uploaded an image, asked the AI to give you essentially some tags metadata. After seeing Taylor's presentation this morning about workflows,
Yeah.
the very first thought is, would have is creating a workflow where you upload an image and ask the AI to give you potential instances.
Yeah.
And is that even remotely plausible, or do you see that as a potential thing? Like, so instead of saying, oh, the tag is a church, I see all these different things in the image, and they potentially are new instances that you could create.
That's very interesting. And also another thing that occurred to me is that, as I said, with the caption that we're using is the first one that comes back. A workflow might be a really good idea to bring it all back, and then you choose. So I think, yes, kind of that a workflow will maybe give you an ability to use the AI responses in a more clever and holistic way. So
maybe even an interactive way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
You may get loads of questions because this is about AI, but I was just wondering. So your example there was stone building with a cross.
Yes.
Did you use any examples where there may be an element of because I know in our own record, some of the photographs we'd have would be of documentary material. So whether or not you could push an image of an antiquarian's report, for example, and then extract or parse decent information out of it?
Yeah, I don't know if there are any AI services that take images and then extract text from them. I have a vague recollection there might be. So again, it would be a case of using the specific service for the specific purpose. I'm not sure if it would work, you'd just be able to plug in one of those services into the function as it is. I think you'd probably need to alter it to get it to process the information as you want it and display it. But again, I think it's one of those things where there are so many different possibilities that those sorts of things are the things that we need to look at in terms of how this can help enhance the data that we save within Arches. Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Chantelle.
Hi, Rob.
This was really awesome, but I have a boring question, which is not about AI, which is, it seems to me like a lot of the work that you've done around tags, simply as a feature, would be a really good candidate for integration into core Arches, regardless of the question of the AI generation aspect of it. And maybe that's more of a comment than a question. So turn it into a question with, have you thought about that, or is that a possibility?
I hadn't thought about it. However,
really cool.
there is a function within the function logic that I think solely takes the tags and checks it against so that could always be kind of pulled out and stuff into core.
Yeah, just that aspect of being able to validate your tags against a collection of concepts, for instance, seems like
that would be cool.
Super useful, regardless of the AI question.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks for this presentation. I had another version of Rob's boring question, which was about the custom metadata for files. Do you anticipate this becoming just something that people are going to keep innovating with? If there could more I just worked on a project that had a case for geometric coordinates on files. So I was just wondering, this is something, I don't know, you would envision coming up with some way to generalize it to make it easier to just compose file custom metadata?
I'd want to kind of make sure that I'm following the patterns that are going to work for everyone, because I followed what you'd written just because I knew that it had been agreed upon. But I think that would be a really interesting thing to discuss and see if there's some way of, as you say, generalizing it. So yeah, let's have that discussion, I think.
This is really great.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you thought about, so presumably you're getting a bunch of tags back from the AI.
Yeah.
And it might be an interesting way to actually sort of generate that collection event as well, or the collection. Where you could actually select, if you get a bunch of them and they match, the opportunity to actually build that collection by sort of selecting new ones that come back.
Yeah.
And so it might be a way to sort of build that up and make it more comprehensive as well.
Yeah.
It's really great.
Thank you.
Very cool presentation.
Thank you.
I just had a question on so much of the data in Arches is built on semantic models, and so much manual work has gone into populating those models. You touched on using Arches data to train an AI, a large language model. Can you talk through some of your considerations there?
It was very much a speculative thing. It would be nice to do. I need to look more at how we would train that model, I think. But yeah, if I get to that point, I would be very interested to, I'd be happy to let you know what my findings are. But thank you. It's an interesting thing to consider. Thank you. Andy?
Using it's pretty cheap. It's training it, so the fine tuning is where it starts getting expensive.
Yeah.
That's why you can use the Outbox one.
But even using it, I mean, if you have, I don't know how many, this is specific to creating data, right? And the vast majority of users are consuming.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like if you had, at some point, you're creating, say, I don't know, 10 new images a day or something like that. Like,
it's got a sense.
Yeah.
Like per go. So it's if you've got a very small, if you're creating a small amount of data every day, it's negligible. I think if you were doing a bulk import or something and sending it through, you might have to go for permission to do it.
I think there's also, it's not just financial cost, it's kind of energy costs. So within the UK government, there's the push towards net zero. So we have to sit there and try and show how we're trying to cut down our emissions, and training any kind of models is incredibly energy intensive. So that's a cost as well to take into consideration. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Wow, this is really an amazing venue. I mean, I can see this great crowd and all of Los Angeles behind you. It's really wonderful. My name is Cyrus Hiatt. I'm with Farallon Geographics. I've been with Farallon for just over 10 years, minus a one-year hiatus. And I started in 2013, the week that Arches 1 was completed. And I've been working primarily on Arches and Arches projects ever since. So today I'm going to be talking about contributing to Arches. The entire process from identifying an issue to creating a PR to getting that PR merged in, and then getting that work out in a release. I'm going to first talk about our active development branches, the ones that we are actively working on in preparation of the next release or releases. And then I'm going to talk about release cadence, the interval with which we release Arches. And then I'm going to talk about communications, how we communicate, and how our communications relate to pull requests, and how we can make the pull request process a little bit more efficient, primarily through communication. So the key takeaways from today's meeting will hopefully be a clear understanding of what dev branch a contribution should target. And then also how to get PRs merged efficiently, what reviewers and contributors can do to expedite the process, and how all of you can help with a release so that we get releases out faster and we get better releases out. And then finally, I'm hoping we all have a better understanding of the process so that as we move forward, we can identify ways to improve it. For the most part, the process is working really well right now, but it is by no means perfect. And in the less than 90 minutes that we have today, I don't think that we're going to make any significant changes. But I think that if we all understand the process really well, then we can all work together to make it even better. So the development branches. There are 3 types of protected branches in arches. These are the branches that you cannot delete. They are the stable, the release branches. So basically, when we are nearing the very end of getting a release out, we create the stable branch. And this has basically one commit, and that is the incrementing of the version number. And that's really the only commit that it gets. And then after that, it just stays in the repository. So if you're ever looking for a branch that represents the release, the stable branch is it. And don't submit any pull requests to the stable branch. Then we have alpha branches. We have started doing this recently with 7.6. And that is when the code kind of settles down during the development process of the feature branch, we will issue an alpha release and publish that on PyPI. So that is available to developers if you're working on, say, an Arches application and you want to pull in Arches, install it from PyPI. That's what the alpha releases are for. And they're not scheduled. They just are released as needed. And then finally, the branches that you're probably all most familiar with, the development branches, the dev branches. And these, of course, are the ones that we are actively working against. Now, we're not working on all dev branches. So there's a dev branch for 7.3 right now. But we are not maintaining that branch. And recently, I saw a Slack message from Andy Jones. And because he's been working on Arches, well, he and the HE team have been working on HER. And he pointed out that maybe we should get rid of these development branches that are not going to result in another release. So I think in the future, unless anyone has any strong objections, we will probably archive these branches so they're not visible to developers and so they don't create any confusion. So if there are no strong objections, we can start doing that today. Great, wonderful. All right, so what I'm going to be talking about today doesn't just apply to core Arches. It applies to all of the repositories in the Arches project organization on GitHub. Now, in the past, we haven't been particularly disciplined about enforcing rules or following these rules, but I think we should do our best to try to stick to them as closely as possible so that when other developers are working on projects like Arches for Science or HER or the Arches templating repo, they know what to expect and how to interact with the repositories in a way that others will understand. So, all right, so before I get into Arches versioning, I just want to say a few words about semantic versioning. We try to follow semantic versioning as closely as we can in Arches. So if you're not familiar with it, it's just a small set of rules that developers can follow to assign and increment version numbers so that when developers use a version as a dependency, they know what to expect, whether the change in the dependency is going to break things or not. One of the criteria of SEMVer is that a project has a publicly available API, and ideally one that is clear and precise. And Arches has a number of features that one would consider its API, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But Arches definitely has an API. How clear and precise it is kind of a matter of, well, I should say, it could be more clear and precise. And I think that's something that we can all work toward in the future. But the other thing that, the other rules that are included in December are how we manage our versions and what goes into each kind of version. And the first is the patch version. And this, we would put bug fixes in. And the key rule is that they're backwards compatible. All of the changes in a bug in a patch release have to be backward compatible with the previous feature releases. So. And then we have minor feature releases. So minor feature releases also get bug fixes, but they can also include new functionality, deprecation paths for features that we want to eventually remove from Arches. And again, feature branches need to be backwards compatible. And then finally, oh, this is not as much room there as on my screen. Major releases, and really the only rule here is that they can be backwards incompatible. Generally, they will include major new functionality, but we can break things in major versions. So there are two priorities when merging into patch releases. And the first of these is security and data integrity. That's number one. And the second priority is an easy upgrade process. So we want people to upgrade to the latest patch release. We want them to have these security and data integrity fixes. And so we want to make it as easy as possible. Ideally, just a pip install upgrade, and then to get the latest updates to front-end dependencies, yarn install and yarn build development or build production. What we don't want people to have to do is run migrations or add or remove or change settings or to reindex, because that can be a very onerous process in some cases for large projects. Now, this second priority is really contingent on the first priority. If a bug is really serious, involves a critical security issue or a data integrity, or, risk data loss, then we may include migration or settings change or even reindexing in order to get that fix in if it's really important. But for the most part, we should do our best to avoid making it difficult for people to upgrade. So what goes in a patch release? Really anything that would stop a feature release. So in the past, we've been quite welcoming of bug fixes in patch releases, but in discussions with other members of the development team, we are moving toward really just patching things that are really considered major bugs. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is in just a moment. But the types of bugs that we want to fix in patch releases are crashing bugs, things that would actually crash the application. Major functionality bugs in newly introduced features. So we introduced to 7.5 the branch Excel and tile Excel exporters to the bulk data manager. So if something like that broke, or we realized it was broken in 7.5, then that's the kind of thing that we would want to fix in a patch. Regressions from previous versions. We don't want people to regret upgrading. So if there's a significant regression from a previous version, then we want to go ahead and fix that as soon as possible. And then, of course, we want to get security fixes in, as well as any kind of bug that would result in data loss. And you'll notice that next to those last two are the words extended support. Now, extended support, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, is the period of overlap between two long-term support releases. So our next LTS will be 7.6, but we will continue to support 6.2 for about 6 months after 7.6 comes out. But this is the extended support period, and during this window, the only things that we will fix are these very serious data loss and security issues. So why not patch minor bugs? The first reason is simply the risk of introducing a new bug, possibly one that's more severe than the first one. And the second reason, which is also very important, is that releases take resources, they take time. And if we're reviewing a lot of less important bugs, or PRs for less important bugs, then we might delay the patch release. And we really want, if we have bugs that may cause data integrity issues, or if we have a serious security issue that we need to get patched, we don't want to delay that release by spending a lot of time testing and reviewing less important bugs. So, so going back to this previous slide again, before considering what gets put into a patch release, you can ask yourself, would this stop a feature release? So. All right, minor versions in Arches. The things that go into a minor version are, of course, data migrations, and we should make sure that any data migrations, or excuse me, database migrations won't affect the API, won't break, cause any backwards incompatible changes, which there are a lot of things that you might migrate that would not break the API, but there are quite a few things that, that might very well break the API. So that's something to consider when adding migration to a feature version. Major dependency upgrades. So in 7.6, we are going to require Python 3.10. And the reason for that, in part, is to keep up with, say, releases of Ubuntu. But 7.6 is going to be our next LTS. And we want users of 7.6 to be on a supported version of Python. So that's one of the reasons for this decision. We also kind of want to encourage people to move to recent versions of Python, because like in 3.11, there are a lot of nice performance improvements that people can benefit from. So in addition to those changes, we can add new settings or modify settings, as long as, again, they don't break the API. And again, the rule for feature releases is that we maintain backward API compatibility. And these are the things that we don't want to break. The REST endpoints, we want to make sure that we don't mess with the parameters of an endpoint nor the response. We want to make sure that we don't break the command line interface. And we also want to make sure that we do our best to make sure that the Python, JavaScript, and SQL interfaces aren't broken for users that have developed or extended Arches in some way and are relying on those properties and methods. And I would say, in regards to the API, being clear and precise, this is probably the area where things are maybe a little bit foggy for developers to know what they can rely on and what they can't. And Jacob had suggested last week that we should probably be using underscores in front of Python methods to indicate to developers what is safe to rely on and maybe what's not. So that's something that we might be doing in the future. But of course, we can't do that until V8, where we can actually break the API, because those kind of changes would break the API. So on to major versions in Arches. Here we can, of course, break things. And generally, a major version in Arches has some major new feature. So in V4, we introduced JSON tiles. We used to save values, what we now call tile values. We used to save them in columns, and actually building a tile in V3 was kind of database intensive if you were doing a lot of them, but JSON tiles has relieved that. Then in V5, we moved from the graph manager to the graph designer. And then in V6, we moved to the two-way relationship data type, changing the format of the resource instance data type from a UUID to an object. And then in V7, of course, localization. And V8, we will be introducing lingo and future graphs, which Rob and Christopher will be talking about tomorrow. Okay, so commit flow. Generally, we target the lowest applicable branch for a PR. And that means that if, say, we have a bug fix that needs to be fixed in 6.2, 7.5, 7.6, and 8, then we would want that bug fix to go in 6.2. And then we will merge that fix upwards from 6.2 to 7.5 and 7.6 and up to 8. So if we have a, let's see, can I see my cursor? Yeah. If we have a bug fix that is related to localization, then we would target 7.5 and again merge that upward from 7.5 to 7.6 and 8. Same thing for a feature, a change to a feature, then that would go in 7.6 and then be moved up to 8. And if someone was working on lingo or future graphs, then those changes would, of course, go directly into 8. There is another way that commits flow through versions, and that is to cherry pick them down. And this sometimes happens if someone is working on a feature and they identify a bug that is sometimes related to that feature, and they fix it in the feature version. So they fix it in 7.6. And then after the PR is merged in, we realize, oh, that bug is also present in 6.2 or 7.5. And in that case, we would need a second PR with the cherry-picked fix to go into one of the other branches. And so this is fine, although it's a little bit more work because it requires at least 2 PRs. And then sometimes the fixes can be a little bit tangled with other feature development work. And in that case, we can't cherry pick it. We need an entirely new PR with a different fix. So ideally, at least what we found to be easiest is to target the lowest applicable branch and then have that moved upward. We used to rely on this a bit more, but the problem is that it requires a bit more discipline from the developers to get all of the PRs in. And so we were missing a lot of bugs that should have gone into the patches. So we've found that the other process of targeting the lowest applicable branch and then having things merged up works a lot better to ensure that patches get into Arches. All right, so I'm going to stop for a little while and ask people if they have any questions or comments or expressions of outrage. Jonathan. Maybe if you could. Yeah, do we have a microphone in the back? Did we? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. In the last scenario that you were describing, in which you cherry pick a commit from a higher development branch down into a lower development branch, whose responsibility is it to identify that that fix needs to be cherry picked down?
It's a good question. Ideally, the reviewer would catch it. I should say, ideally the developer themselves would catch it, and they would write their fix in such a way that it's in maybe 1 or at most 2 commits. Even better, they switch branches and then just create a separate issue and deal with that in a separate PR. But at that point, it's if it does end up getting merged in, then oftentimes it is just discovered through someone else using 7.6 or 7.5, and they're like, oh, this bug that I see was fixed in 7 or in 8 or in 7.6 is not in 7.5 or 6.2, and then we need another PR. And it is really the original developer's responsibility to submit that PR against one of those branches. So there are certainly cases where bugs get fixed in the feature version or the major version, and we never realized that they were fixed there. And so, yeah. So we just do our best to keep our eyes up for these things. So be vigilant, yes. Any other questions? Phil.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful and very interesting. I guess one question, just really to touch on the point about, I guess, visually indicating what is and isn't considered public API. +1 for that, actually. Sounds good. But you know, would there be interest in moving more towards trying to separate those abstractions a little bit, so that okay, we know these modules are more public and these modules are less public, or that we have a little bit more abstraction layers, that type of thing, where you can say, okay, right, everything in here is definitely public, and we're good till 8 or good till 9.
Right.
Is that something that there'd be appetite for, do you think, or?
Yeah, I think we should definitely consider that. Yeah, it would be great to have you in conversations about that. So, yeah.
I feel like I just committed to PRs there.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Well, then let's move on to release cadence, the frequency with which we come out with releases. So we used to rely on feature-driven releases. And by that I mean that from Arches 1 all the way through Arches 7.3, we would come out with a new feature and then publish a release. Or we would fix something and come out with a patch release. So there was no schedule to releases. We would oftentimes set a date for a release, and when we would get there, sometimes we'd find, oh, well, there's another feature and we're just a couple weeks away from getting that in, and we'll get that in. So, so the process, although it worked really well when we had a small user and developer community that was all kind of on the same page about what was going on with Arches, it became a little bit more difficult to manage as the community has grown. And so it ended up kind of unpredictable for a lot of users. And so since 7.4, we have moved to scheduled releases. So right now, we have a 6-month interval between feature and major releases. So that means every 6 months, we come out with either a feature release, or if it's time for a major release, then we'll come out with a major release. And for LTS releases, we have a 2-year interval, again with that 6 months of extended support between them. And then patch releases are not scheduled. And the reason why they're not scheduled is because, again, we want to get patch releases out as quickly as possible. So we don't want to set a release date for patch releases, because then we would just be waiting with a perfectly good bug fix until an arbitrary date. So, so we simply release as needed. All right. So the drawback of scheduled releases is really that it requires patience. So we do our best to stick to the roadmap, and the features that are identified for going into that feature release end up in that feature release. But a lot of times, feature releases have a lot of other features, minor features, that we want to get to users. And despite our best efforts to follow the roadmap, if something doesn't make it into the feature release, then it doesn't make it in. We release anyway to get all of those other features in the release, and that feature ends up going out into the next release. And so this can require some patience, but it is predictable for users and developers, or at least as predictable as we can make it. Now, we've done this for 2 releases now, for 7.4 and 7.5. And we have discovered that 6 months is really short. We have, so a bit of incentive here to move to a 9-month interval, maybe 8 or 9 month interval, which would require even more patience. However, another drawback is it's a little bit harder to calculate the release dates. 6 months is really easy. 9 months is a little bit harder, especially, but it's of course perfectly doable. But the big advantage to a longer interval is that we have more time to get complex features into a release. And we have more time for a longer feature freeze. So for the last 2 releases, our feature freeze has been less than a month. For 7.6, if we were to stay on a 6-month interval, we would definitely want it to be 4 weeks at least. But if we were to move to a 9-month interval, that would give us a lot of room to have, say, a 2-month feature freeze, during which time we could really focus on bug fixes and ensure that our release when it comes out is as stable as possible. So let me just walk everyone through an example of the cadence. In December of 23, last December, we came out with version 7.5. And at that time, we stopped patching 7.4x and started patching 7.5x to come out with 7.5.1 and 7.5.2. And we continue to support 6.2x as the long-term release. If we were to stay on a 6-month interval, we would release 7.6 on June of this year. 9-month interval, that would be September. And we would come out with 7.6 as our feature release. And all the while, we're working on 8.0 for the next major release. And then we would make 7.6 the next LTS, patch that. And we would continue to patch 6.2x with those security fixes and data integrity fixes while it's in extended support. In the next iteration, which would be 8, coming out in either 12/24, which is maybe a little bit unrealistic, but on a 9-month release, June of 25, we'd come out with 8.0 as our feature/major release. We would then start working on our next major release, 9. We would begin patching 8.0x to come out with 8.01. And we would no longer be supporting 6.2. It would just be 7.6 as our LTS. I'm going to show a, okay, yeah, that's readable. So just for a little bit of a visual, the blue line is the current date. And we are currently working towards 7.6 LTS. We are patching 7.5, and we are patching 6.2x. This is on a Oh, I don't have my tabs here. Oh, well, this is an example of the 6-month interval. I have another Gantt chart with a 9-month interval to just to show it as a comparison of how things get stretched out. But I can't reach my tabs down here for some reason. So, well, anyway, I can share that those Gantt charts with anyone who's interested. All right. Any questions or thoughts? Galen.
Test. Oh. So, you know, it's great. It like seeing that Gantt chart is like a dream come true, you know, because it's like, hey, I can plan, I can, you know, this is predictable. One other follow-up, you know, you mentioned, for example, pairing 3.10 with Python 3.10 with 7.6 because 3.10 is an LTS for Python, or at least it's, you know, it's gonna be supported.
It's at least supported, yeah.
Is there, like beyond Python, right, we're also concerned about Django. Are we also mindful of the other core dependencies and their like maintenance schedules?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are, and basically what we do is we loosen the constraints, and we just did this at Jacob's suggestion just recently for Python. We loosened the constraint on the upward bounds of the patch releases for Django. So when you pip install arches, you pip install the latest patch release for Django. And that's also true for the front-end dependencies, most of them. When you yarn install, you will get the latest patch releases for those as well. Yeah, so that's a good point. Yeah. And I would also say that in terms of upgrading major dependencies with new versions of arches, we do this with great discretion. We know that it can be a lot of trouble for people to upgrade Python on a server, but we do it for good reason. So we wouldn't just force everyone to upgrade Postgres willy-nilly. So yeah, just thought I mentioned that. Any other thoughts?
So has a decision been made then to go to a 9-month schedule, or is that still in flux?
I would say it's extremely likely. Unless, just a show of hands, would you say that we're releasing arches too frequently or not frequently enough? All right. Who says not frequently enough? All right, I would say that's a decision. But when we make this decision, we need to stick with it for a while. The intent is to be predictable, and if we're continuously changing the interval, then we're not being very predictable. So, we're giving it a lot of thought, and go ahead, Chantelle.
I was going to say, when you were putting 7.5 out, and we were trying to get accessibility and all the other bits in, it was really, really helpful to have a lot of notice as to when you wanted us to get our features in and then to get our bugs in. So I just wanted to feed that back, that it was really useful because it then meant that we could plan our time to make sure that we weren't rushing in the last 2 weeks that suddenly we've got to get these features in. So to have that advance notice as a standard part of the release process would be amazing.
Great. We actually need to announce that for 7.6, but it's a little bit contingent on what the interval changes to. But as soon as we reach a solid decision, then we can go ahead and announce that. So that's great feedback. Thank you.
I'll second that.
All right, wonderful. Did you have a thought, Chris? Okay, perfect. Okay, so the feature release process, we'll just walk through this process. So currently for the last 2 releases, as I mentioned, we've had a little bit less than 4 weeks for the feature freeze. For 7.6, it would definitely be 4 weeks if we were to have stuck with the 6-month interval. But like I said, we'll probably make the feature freeze longer if we move to a 9-month interval. The next thing after the feature freeze that we do is QA testing. So in addition to the automated tests that Arches has, the unit tests, before a release, we actually do some smoke testing. We have a test battery, a list of features that we want to make sure work, and then a user actually goes through and tests these features. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. The next step after QA testing, because during the QA testing process, we end up creating more tickets. After those are in, then we start to triage bugs, prioritizing the most critical bugs. And then at about 2 weeks out, we have a freeze on non-critical bugs. But we continue to work on severe bugs and update the release notes all the way until the end of the deadline. So you're free to submit patches for bugs all the way to the end. And we want the release notes to be as good as possible. So if anyone sees anything that can be improved in the release notes, then we want those changes as well. And then finally, when that's done, we create the stable branch. We set the version, and then we push to PyPI. And then we tag the stable branch with the release, and then announce it on the forum. So back to testing. So certainly Arches could use more automated testing, more unit tests, and we've become more disciplined about that, I would say, in the past few months, really. So now we're more likely to require a unit test if someone is making changes to Python code. And when we move to Vue, we will probably introduce unit tests for the front end as well, if not full end-to-end testing. But regardless, before a release, we still need a human being to look at Arches and make sure that it really works. And so in the past, when Arches was less complex, it wasn't all that much work to go through the battery of tests to identify the features that we want to make sure are working properly. But as Arches has grown in complexity and in features, this is a lot more work. And so probably a couple months before the release of 7.6, I'll probably be sending out information about what others can do to help with this process. And if more people are involved, then it's just a matter of going in and identifying a couple of features, maybe something that you have been actually testing recently while you were working on Arches, and just make sure that they work. And if they don't, then just write a ticket, and then we can include that bug in the triage. So that would really improve, I think, the quality of releases, because we'd get more eyes on the application prior to the release. And it would also allow us to focus on fixing bugs rather than doing a lot of manual testing if it's distributed across the developer community. So maybe just a quick show of hands, who would be willing to help with the release testing? Great, wonderful, thank you. All right, any questions about that process?
Sure. Oh, Cyrus. I had a quick question. I just noticed the idea, the concept really of a critical bug.
Oh, thanks.
I'm right
Cyrus.
here.
Okay. You're behind Aaron. I was like, where is it?
Voice.
Yeah, and your voice is coming from the speaker, not from me.
Sorry. The idea of critical bugs. I guess it's just a short comment. I guess we don't have a flag, or when we label our issues, there's a label for a bug, but there's no such thing as a critical bug, and how to even differentiate what defines critical or non-critical. Anyways, it seems like maybe we might need a little clarification there, and at least another tag, and maybe some way of identifying, differentiating those two.
We have a priority, but you're right. The priority might be a little bit different from identifying whether something is a critical bug. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there would be two different kinds of critical bugs. One that is related to security or to data loss. That's the kind that gets fixed in the extended support period. I mean, it always gets fixed, but that's the only one that we would worry about in that extended support period. But then there are also the major bugs, the ones that I've mentioned previously, anything that causes the system to crash, the CLI to crash, or causes a recent feature that was released in the previous feature to not work anymore, so that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's a good point, that we should add something like that to the repository. Yeah.
Talking about the QA testing, I agree completely that it makes sense to have as many people, involved as possible for all the reasons you mentioned. And I'm just thinking about, is it still done as like editing the markdown file in the release?
No, we stopped doing that. And now we just have a spreadsheet that we maintain. This was just more manageable to use a spreadsheet than that markdown file, because when people were editing that markdown file, there's just so many changes going on, and so it's just kind of messy. Yeah. So we moved to just a spreadsheet, and we asked Christopher about this, because Christopher comes from Yelp. Like, how do they do it at Yelp? And he said, well, it's kind of just really a very similar process, right, Christopher? So we're in good company there.
Well, I mean, no offense to Yelp, but I'm just wondering. I'm just wondering if we can, take it to the next level, because, for example, if I am finding a bug, if I'm testing something, I find a bug, and I say, hey, I found this bug, there's this issue, right? And then Alexi says, well, I'm testing and I can't reproduce that bug, right? Mm-hmm. I think capturing certain metadata about that QA test might be valuable and save time. And I'm wondering, I know we can do a million, we can have ChatGPT in a spreadsheet, but I'm just wondering, like, if we could have a better tool to just make that flow more quickly and seamlessly.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought a little bit about this, and my dream would be an actual web application.
Yeah.
Where people could just sign in, maybe with their GitHub login, and then we could use the GitHub API so that they could actually submit tickets through a web application. They don't have to leave it. They can just go ahead and do that. And then we have a record in a database that we can go back to and query and have a good history of our testing. But it's a matter of finding the time to do something like that. So I think, yeah, that's a good point.
We could potentially use something better, like Airtable, and also then we could have leaderboards.
Right, totally.
QA leaderboards.
Yes, yeah, wonderful, yeah.
Cyrus, I was just wondering, you mentioned moving to V8 and Vue and UI framework for testing. Do we have any thoughts about what we might use, or are there thoughts in the audience about what would be a good framework for testing UI in V8?
I don't know if Christopher plans on talking about that tomorrow, when maybe going into detail, but I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Christopher, but Vue has its own testing kit. Great, yeah. So that.
Cyrus, when you're asking about people who might want to take part in QAing a release, people might want to might be able to do it for one release and not another. So I'm wondering if maybe using the community forum, set up a poll when you're ready to think about that, so you can get people saying, yeah, okay, contact me for this release, and then you've kind of got people who've signed up. but then not expecting them to do it at every release. I don't know if that kind of flexibility might make people more likely to come forward than think, oh, I've got to do this for every release.
You know, I'd actually imagine something much more flexible than that. The way that we currently do it is that there's this long battery of tests, and someone now just goes and enters their initials next to the test, and that indicates that they're doing that test. So no one else wants to bother with that. They can pick something else, put their initials next to it, and then go do the test. So basically, the spreadsheet would be available to everyone. You just enter your name, or we probably move to names instead of initials because so that we don't have any conflicts. And then if you have a few minutes of time and you just see something like, oh, I know that works, check. I know that doesn't work, check. Write a ticket, put the ticket number next to it. So really pretty, and then we'll just fill in everywhere that people haven't tested. So, but yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Phil?
Thank you. And actually, just to follow up on Dennis's question there. So I guess the testing with you is more looking at the component testing than necessarily the end-to-end kind of Cypress-style testing. Conscious I might just be volunteering for more PRs here, but
this is being recorded.
I guess one of the things that we've been working on for the application that Jana was talking about this morning is trying to put some Cypress tests into RCI and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
If we were moving out from Cypress, it would be good to know, because then what we might do is try and jump the gun on that and for example, look at whatever framework's coming in to port some of our tests before we do too many. That type of thing. So just if that's looking like it'll be on the cards for the integration tests, that would be helpful to have a chat about.
My guess is that we would probably be using Cypress if we were doing end-to-end testing. Is that what you were thinking, Christopher? So you might have a head start there.
Yeah. Great news. Thank you.
All right. Okay, is this going to come back up again? Come on. Yes, perfect. Jacob, did you have?
Oh yeah, I had one slide today, but it's just, I guess, on the what branch to target. Do folks think it's worthwhile to add maybe just one bullet point to boilerplate in the pull request template to just help improve communication around, oh, I'm targeting this branch because, like, maybe there's a subtle backwards incompatibility that a reviewer wouldn't have noticed, so that the reviewer doesn't go, why don't you backport this? It'd be like, actually, there's this, would it be worth that kind of small boilerplate in the template?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, just to encourage people to include that information. I think that would be great. Yeah, thanks. All right, so on to developer communications. So at one time, communications were really easy when the development team was small. This is Alexi, and this is Dennis, and this is Rob, and this is Adam, and this is Ryan. And I am the photographer who took that amazing photo. And as far as I know, this is the only photograph of the entire development team of Arches at any point. And I'll just say that I'm hoping that maybe tomorrow, before people start to head home on Friday, if we get a little bit of time, it would be wonderful to get a group photo, especially because this is our first in-person developer meeting. And we would make sure that everyone was facing the camera. All right. So at one time in 2013, we were using Skype. And or we were just tapping each other on the shoulder. The problem with this was that it was not very transparent, but the developer community and the user community was very small, so it wasn't so important. Later, we moved to Slack, and then we were using GitHub and ZenHub for communications related to issues, but not heavily. Most of our communications were still done in Slack. Over the past few years, we have made a strong effort to move communications out of Slack and into GitHub, as well as Discourse, which is what our forum is running on. And the reason for that is that Slack communications are ephemeral. We don't have a paid account for Slack, so the messages don't last very long. But the more important reason is that as the community has grown, we want to make sure that our communications with the entire development community are as transparent as possible. And so we've really tried to push in that direction, and we've been, I'd say, very successful. Before we started this, we spoke with a consultant that the Getty had hired, Jana Bacon, and he pointed out that when we looked at the list of pull requests that we had, next to the number of communications, next to each PR, we had a lot of ones, maybe a 2. Now, when you look at that list, we have, almost all of them have either a 2 or a 3, and sometimes 15, 16, so on. So I'd say that we have done a pretty good job at moving in that direction, becoming more transparent. And then moving from Google Groups to Discourse, I think, was a really nice development. The Getty actually moved the forum to Discourse, which is, I think, an easier platform to use. And so that has been really great. So how do we use each of these methods of communication? For Slack, as I said, it's not permanent and it is less transparent. However, it's really helpful for things like requesting a reviewer for a PR, just to get their attention, or to ask, is this, who would be interested in reviewing this PR if you're unsure, or for checking if others are seeing an issue that you're seeing. Maybe you see a bug, but you're not certain whether it's an environmental issue. You can check on Slack, and so great for these purposes. But not good for talking about PRs and issues and things that we really want commemorated in GitHub along with that PR or issue. And for support questions or announcements or requesting community input, like we did for determining what web framework we wanted to move to, or whether we were going to have a developer meeting or not, the forum is really the platform for that kind of thing. And then also meetings. So we have a stand-up meeting at 10:30 every Tuesday and Thursday, and the development community is welcome to attend these. However, we realize that 10:30 Pacific might not be the most convenient time for people in other parts of the world. You can see that Andy and Chantelle completely agree with this. So we have discussed in the past dedicating another day, or maybe moving Tuesday or Thursday to a different day at a different time that is more suitable to people in other time zones. So that's something that we should probably discuss, because it would be great to have more participation in those meetings. They're a great opportunity to run ideas by the rest of the development team in an informal way, so before, say, even an issue is written. And in talking to Dennis about kind of the positive response that we had to this developer meeting, we have discussed having regular scheduled developer meetings online, not in person. We don't have to come to Los Angeles every 3 months. But that would be a nice opportunity for people to present their work and to discuss developer issues that come up, just to keep the entire development community in the loop. So, but we'll maybe discuss that a little bit more on the forum. All right, so pull requests. And I bring up pull requests because a lot of communications surround pull requests. And I think communication is probably the best thing that we have to expediting pull requests and getting them merged in. And I think one of the key things about PRs is we want to avoid surprises as much as possible. Because when a PR comes up and nobody was expecting it, then we can run into issues, and one is duplication of effort. When Chantelle was presenting this morning, and she started talking about the file list data type, I was like, oh, Jacob already did this. Fortunately, you discovered that. But had you not, then it would have been a lot of duplication of effort. So communicating about what we're doing, what we're working on, can help us leverage the work that other people are doing. Then another thing that can come up is simply taking the wrong approach given upcoming features. So imagine that you spend 2 weeks introducing great new features to the RDM, only to find out that it is getting replaced by Lingo. And we wouldn't want to merge your PR into core, possibly. So, communicating your ideas, although sometimes it's tempting, you have a good idea, you just want to kind of hammer it out. But communicating your idea before investing a lot of time and effort is a good idea to save a bit of time. Another issue is that PRs are often based on the wrong branch, and this isn't such a big deal. I mean, it often just involves rebasing, but it does involve communications back and forth. So it's nice when a PR comes in and it's on the right branch, and as Jacob pointed out, we know why it's targeting a particular branch. That can be really helpful to reduce friction in getting a PR in. And then the last thing is the PR that you submit might actually be a better fit for an Arches application. Those have been introduced in 7.6. Alexi's going to talk more about them tomorrow, but I think we want to keep Arches lean and manageable and avoid bloat. So I think that suggesting that things become an Arches application where it can be managed outside of Arches, but simultaneously in its own repo, is going to become more common as we proceed with Arches development. So that's another thing to kind of be aware of. So just to go through the PR process and kind of talk about communications a little bit more. The first thing to do before starting a PR is really to confirm that an issue doesn't already exist. And if it doesn't, to go ahead and create an issue in the Arches repo. And then very importantly, to indicate your intent to start work on that issue. And for bug fixes, it's not so important, but if it's a new feature, then it is really good to know that people are diving into it. And there are two things that you can do. In the pipeline, there's an Arches project called Pipeline. You can flip the no status to in progress so that we know that you're taking responsibility for it. And then the second thing, which is very helpful, as I mentioned before, is to notify people on Slack or to join the stand-up and mention that you're working on something. That way, we have time to start a conversation about it, because it could be that somebody else on the development team has already been putting a lot of thought, and it hasn't necessarily started, but has given it some thought, or there have been conversations around it. And then we have a chance to have a conversation and identify the requirements for completion for that, or to identify a strategy for going about it that is forward-looking toward the upcoming features in Arches. So I think it's just really good to have a little bit of dialogue before diving into a lot of work. And then finally, assign the PR and request review. And Assigning the PR is nice because then you can see, on GitHub it's very visible that a PR has been assigned to you. Generally, if someone assigns me a PR but doesn't necessarily make me a reviewer, I will go ahead and either review it myself or find someone else to review it. But it's also nice to get a message on the Slack that you're looking for someone to do the review, or to just mention that you've been assigned to a PR. And I get messages sometimes from Andy Jones. Got a PR, assign it to you. Please review it or find someone who is best qualified to review it. So that's extremely helpful. Galen also submits messages in Slack, and as well as Brett. So that's great. Okay. Ways to speed up a review. This isn't so much of a problem. People are pretty good about this, but address only one issue and just that issue in the PR. It can be a little bit daunting to get a PR that addresses several issues. It's better to have smaller PRs that are really very targeted to a particular issue that's just a lot easier to test and release. And the work can then be distributed to other developers, so one person isn't stuck with a ton of work. So making PRs as targeted as possible will speed up the process. Although I know that it slows the developer down because they have to create separate PRs. But in the end, I think it's a net benefit to make the PRs targeted. The other is, if possible, to update the release notes. So in the release notes, we do things like indicate that we are upgrading versions or adding new dependencies. We also add a line item for bug fixes that are added to the branch or new features. So even if you're a little bit unsure about how to update the release notes, you can always ask. But it's nice to have those changes so that right before the release, we're not sifting through past PRs trying to figure out everything that went into this release. So that really helps the release process when we have a really good draft of what the release notes should look like. And making those changes when the PR is merged in is best because it's fresh in people's minds. It's not someone who's responsible for the release trying to figure out exactly what that PR really does. So that is very helpful. And then, as I mentioned before, we'd like to see more unit tests. So going ahead and including unit tests in your machine keeps going to sleep. It'll come back. There we go. Include unit tests. That also makes the review process a little bit easier because we can just make sure that the test is doing the job of what the reviewer is going to do, which is first to test the code. And then to use descriptive commit messages. I personally, when I'm reviewing a PR, the first thing that I do is look through the commit messages to kind of get an idea, the narrative of what is in that PR before I really even look at the code. And the more descriptive the commit messages are, the better, because then I have an understanding of what the contributor has done. Then I know this can be difficult if you have your editor set up to format code on save. But it's really nice to have formatting in a separate commit from logic if possible. And that's just because if you get a PR and 100 lines of code have been changed and only 2 of those lines have the logic related to the issue, then it's just kind of a Where's Waldo exercise in trying to figure out where those lines are. And so it's nice to have them in separate commits if possible. Or even a separate PR. And then, and I know that sometimes you might feel like you're pestering somebody, but I think that most reviewers actually welcome a check-in. So if it's been a little while, you've asked someone to review your PR and they haven't, people get busy. We all have deadlines. that we're trying to meet, and lots of distractions. And so if you just check in with your reviewer and say, hey, I just want to see where this is at, or just want to see how this is going. If you're too busy, I can give it to somebody else or something like that, I think is very helpful. And don't hesitate to do that. I wouldn't check with someone 3 times a day. But on occasion, if you've waited a little while and you haven't seen any progress, then go ahead and check in. And then similar to that is to be responsive to your reviewer. So when someone does review a PR and they suggest changes, it's nice if you respond quickly, because if you wait 4 weeks, the reviewer is no longer thinking about that PR anymore, so they've lost a little bit of context. So it's nice to respond to a comment from a PR while it's fresh in the reviewer's mind. And I know, again, the committers also get, or contributors also get very busy. They submit a PR and then they're on to the next thing. And so they'll let things get stale. I've done it myself, as Jacob knows. But being responsive, checking in and being responsive to your viewer will really help move the process along and really, I think, streamline things. And the more bug fixes we get into feature release and patch releases, the better, and will improve the quality of what we deliver to our users. All right. So I just wanted to say one last thing. When I was working on this, I started looking at the Git history, and so I thought I'd put together a little visualization. Over the course of Arch's development, we have had a total of 50 contributors. And in the chart to the right, you can see this green line. And these are the number of new contributors that we have had that have, for the first time, contributed to Arches. The blue line represents those contributors that contributed that year, but have also contributed in a previous year. And the red line represents the combination of the two. So when I first looked at this, I was a little concerned because you can see the slope of the green line is going down, which means that we aren't getting as many new contributors as we did in 2016, 2017, and 2018. And maybe that is a legitimate concern. I would say it is. It would be great to have a growing number of new contributors. But the positive thing about this, this chart is that the blue line has an upward trend, except for this dip at the end, but this is 2024, and we're only 1 quarter in. So we can expect this line to go up by the end of the year. I would hopefully above 18. So I think that this chart really demonstrates that we're really on a positive trend. I mean, I think it indicates the health of the developer community, that we have more contributors that have contributed and are contributing the next year and are contributing the next year. And I think that these are, really valuable people to have on the team. So, yeah, thank you. I'll just go through this just really quickly, so you can see. In 2014, and we were using Mercurial before we switched to Git, so that information is not included here. But in 2014, this was the development team, and in 2015, it didn't change much. And then in 2016, we got 4 new contributors. And that trend continued on into 2017 and 2018 and 2019 in 2019, we got Galen on board, and he was very busy that year. you didn't have to say anything. You're okay. Right.
I don't know how many times I've looked through the GitHub history of the line. I'm like, who did this? And it's black. I'm like, don't blame me.
And then Christopher joined in let's see, 2020. Yeah, then let's see, Aaron the year later. And then on to 2022. Just a few. Welcome, Brett. And then welcome, Samuel. And Jonathan. And Alan, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. Alan Tapscott, I guess is how you say his last name. And Taylor. So. All right. Any other questions? Galen?
Will you go back to the avoid surprises slide?
I wanted to find a good Giphy for this slide, but just couldn't find anything. Yeah.
I think, you know, when I look at this list, I think that like the first two feel a little bit like moving goalposts at times, because you kind of have to be really current to know not only who is already working on a feature, but who is thinking about working on a feature. And that won't actually be documented in a more public space until there's a PR or it's in the release notes. Or if it's you know in the discourse post in the forum. And I agree strongly with these 2 points. I think that we can do a better job though in broadcasting. I think it's like a little, it's almost unfair to use the word wrong, because it's like, I didn't know it was wrong, you know, or I didn't know that there was this other feature upcoming, like.
Right, yeah, maybe wrong is a strong word, but not ideal, maybe. But it's really hard to do that, because it's not just the people in the stand-up necessarily. Like Phil has been working on permissions, and did a great job at providing one of the most comprehensive tickets I've ever seen on describing what he was doing. So he did actually a great job, but had already been thinking about it for some time. And we've also been thinking about default deny. And it's really because of that issue, though, that we had a conversation. And it probably would have been better to have a little bit of dialogue first. So I agree, kind of documenting these things, both on the the people that are regularly on the stand-up, but also from people out in the community, what they're thinking about would be nice. But it's just really hard to do. But that's something to be aware of as we work on arches. So yeah, thanks, Galen. Phil?
Maybe just follow up on that one, actually. Yeah, I think that is a, so, as you say, it's also a nice example, because it's one where that's kind of led to conversations that we probably wouldn't have had if we hadn't kind of said, okay, well, let's see what we've got early and show the cards and see what everyone thinks. But I'm just wondering, I mean, I know so for some projects it kind of ends up with things like special interest groups and so forth, where you can see something coming up and you've got a large development community. But I wonder if there's a light touch element of maybe say, okay, let's have like a special, like an SIG type post in discourse or something that can kind of consolidate, or like at least be a lightning rod for some of that discussion. So, oh, here's permissions. Yeah, okay, we can see there's a discussion going on now. Okay, let's chime in. And now we've got a bit of a group of people who are getting notifications regularly on that topic.
Right. I think, yeah, that's a good point. And
we also talked about having developer meetings on a more regular basis. Like just like so,
yeah.
A Zoom meeting that's mutually inconvenient for. Sorry. a Zoom meeting that's inconvenient for everybody, where you can just say, hey, who else is thinking about permissions, or who else is thinking about doing a better job of showing search results on a map? Things that everybody cares about and is likely to generate a good, healthy discussion.
I think actually a follow-up to that as well is, I think it's also something we need to, my own fears says, actually trying to make sure that we're all nosing having those discussions. Because personally, I find I'm often kind of like getting the head down in project things and then miss them, and that's probably something to take as feedback, is just trying to be disciplined about that.
Yeah, so I think, both suggestions are great, the developer meetings and also, putting ideas on the forum especially if you didn't make the developer meeting, going ahead, and if you didn't make it, hey, also, or here's a topic of discussion for the developer meeting if I'm not able to make it or something like that, So. All right. One more.
Hey Cyrus.
Hey,
this
Rob.
was really great.
Thanks.
My question is, first an observation. I noticed a number of people trying to capture the content of your slides via their cell phone cameras. And I note in my mind, this was very dense with information that people might want to refer back to. So, can we share these slides with the group? Is that?
Yeah. Well, it's Reveal.js, so.
You did it as a web project.
But I think this is a group.
Well, fair enough. Maybe we can get it hosted somewhere then.
Yeah. But I think this is a group that can handle Reveal.
Yeah,
so.
Maybe we can throw it GitHub pages or something.
So that's a good idea. But I should also mention that Eric has a PR for the contributor guidelines, and so some of these things we might want to discuss and just make sure that they're represented there. So, but I think that we'll probably have a new contributor guidelines soon. So, it'll be there as well. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, I was just speaking of communication. I created a Slack channel just for the meetup, the developer meeting, because async communication, sharing links to stuff. I tried to add everybody I could, but there are also a bunch of folks who are not on the Arches Slack. So.
Thank you for bringing that up. Rob and I we talked about this just before I got up here. Anyone who's interested in getting on Slack, I think you probably want to talk to Ryan. Ryan, you can add people, right? Okay. Yeah. So talk to Ryan if you want to be on the Arches Slack. And you should want to be on it. Yes, I really encourage you to join. So. All right, well, I'm going to pass it on to Eric, who's going to talk about documentation. So thank you, everybody. All right, let me get this out of the way.
Is everybody nicely caffeinated? Never enough, yeah. All right. I guarantee you that caffeine is going to be really important for the next topic, which is going to be documentation. And it's all right. Okay, so because I'm the last thing between you and the next break, I will get started and introduce some issues and topics in documentation, and hopefully over the next few days we can have a chance to talk about this with the other kinds of projects you're going to be working on here and then in the upcoming weeks and months ahead, because after you've forged all these wonderful collaborative bonds with your colleagues here. we want to make sure that that's sustained, and that also helps sustain the fueling of excellent documentation so that the work that you do is meaningful, has impact, and is actually used by a wider community. Just to introduce myself, my name is Eric Kansa. I am working as a consultant to the Getty Conservation Institute, and my background is in archaeology and in research data management in archaeology specifically. And so I've been engaged in sort of technology, software, data management issues in the space of cultural heritage for the past 20 years or so. And I'm really, really, really grateful to be with you in the Arches community, and actually now finally having an opportunity to meet with you face to face. This is a really rare and very precious opportunity, and I really hope that we be able to continue this and do wonderful things, continuing more into the future. So, without further ado, you're all familiar with Arches, obviously, and again, just to remind people also some of the context around this, a lot of the purpose, the funding, the mission behind this has been really to support data management in the world of cultural heritage, specifically for conservation of cultural resources. And when we're doing that, we're also engaging with communities that often have very different levels of technical capacity. And some are going to have software engineers, like our colleagues with Historic England and the really important, wonderful work that they're doing with, especially around accessibility. But a lot of other institutions don't have that same kind of capacity, but they have a lot of the needs. And this is where Arches is such an important part of the landscape, because it's providing a level of technical capabilities and capacities that are otherwise unattainable to a lot of organizations. Mindful of that, though, when we want to build community, and this is one of the real foci of open source, is the sense that it has a community focus, that we want to pool and talent the resources, reduce costs and risks. The people that we're going to be engaging with and the people that we would like to have as part of our community are not necessarily only software engineers, and they don't necessarily have a lot of the capabilities in that space yet, but we want to sort of build that capacity not just by providing excellent software with Arches, but also so that building the technical capabilities of the community that we're working with. So in some ways, this sort of teaching and learning is kind of part of this mission. And that's kind of where I want to situate some of the conversation around documentation, because documentation is in some ways one of those tools. It's one of those ways in which that we help build capacity in the Arches community to engage with Arches, and also so that people who are using with our Arches also get a better understanding of the underlying technologies, the needs around the technologies, how to manage those technologies, administrate that, maintain that, make decisions around that, so that they can work more effectively in their organizations. And a lot of those organizations doing cultural heritage work, so that do more effective cultural heritage work. So that's what I want to just sort of preface when talking about documentation. So with that said, I just want to refer us all back to the Code of Conduct, which is an important aspect of open source communities. And really it's centered around working towards being welcoming and inclusive. And that's also for people with different kinds of levels of technical expertise. And here's where documentation also could be really important to sort of bootstrap people so that they can be part of this community and more effectively engage in the community, benefit from it, and participate in it and contribute to it. So, also as a reminder, besides software, there are lots of avenues and aspects of collaboration that are important. So, a lot of you have probably seen this slide already, but this is, again, with the release of Arches version 7, the major release of Arches version 7, where internationalization was introduced. And so this is just a little bit of some of the work on contributions for internationalizing different parts of core Arches so that it can be deployed in different linguistic and cultural communities. Another thing that's also very important, obviously, are the user groups, and participating and engaging in the user groups is one of the things that I think has been really invaluable. A lot of the developer team, the people that are in this room, have been really active with the user groups, both in the UK and in the United States. And that's a great way of having conversations with people who are not necessarily in the software world, but are really interested in needing to engage with Arches and the Arches technical community. And that helps build up those relationships and ties. And that helps really, it's valuable for people who do the software to be able to understand what community needs are. And it's also important vice versa to understand what some of the issues are with developing software, so that people who are not necessarily technologists can understand the application a little bit better, understand how to engage with it and how to make decisions around that. So this is very important too. Cyrus mentioned the forum, the community forum, and this is also another one of those avenues where the technical community and the less technical community are also engaging with conversations around Arches and surfacing issues, surfacing questions that can be answered oftentimes by people who are in the developer teams. And those conversations help inform future road mapping. They also inform my work with documentation. This is one thing I forgot to say at the very beginning of the presentation, that I am responsible for overseeing pull requests to the documentation for Arches. And I'll get to that in a moment. So anyway, back to reiterate this point, all of these different avenues of communication are important for building this more inclusive community, so that the people that are engaged on the software and in the technology are part of a larger community of people who are more on the user side, or people who are making decisions around whether or not they want to install Arches, or how they want to integrate Arches into their own projects or own organizations. So, now we get to the sort of nitty-gritty of documentation a little bit. So, it matters. This is sometimes what software documentation can feel like if you've ever engaged with a new application and you're ever trying to figure out how to make it work. And this is a big challenge, right? So, just to describe a little bit about this. This is a screenshot from the Arches documentation. It is a collaboratively curated information resource, and it is managed in many ways in a very similar way that the source code is managed, right? So this is a lot of the similar workflows and software infrastructure, GitHub, are used for the curation of the documentation, as is done with the core of the software application of Arches. So, that said, the avenues for collaborating directly with the Arches documentation, I want to highlight that there are multiple ways of doing that. So, first of all, on the back end, the specific is that we're using Sphinx, and it is very widely used. It's one of the more popular ways that open source projects manage their documentation. It uses restructured text, so you can easily compose with it. You can make lists, tables. There's hyperlinking and cross-referencing. It indexes really nicely for search, And it is really supported by a whole suite of services that are out there. So it's on GitHub, integrates with Read the Docs, and the way that we're using it is that the versions that we have and the branches that we have in our Sphinx documentation really match with the major and minor versions of arches. So when there's like a 7.6 release coming up, there will be a 7.6 branch of the arches documentation that will be created to have documentation specific to that minor release of arches. So that's more or less how it works. And any one of you can download the repo for the, clone the repo for the arches documentation, deploy it on your own laptop, do all the installation stuff for Sphinx, and happily edit away at the documentation and make pull requests to me. And that would be fantastic. What I want to highlight, though, again, is the notion that you're in a larger community. You're going to be talking to people. You're going to be interacting with your colleagues who are not necessarily technologists, and sometimes you're going to see gaps in the documentation that your colleagues who will not want to set up a virtual environment and pip install all that stuff, they are going to need to have other ways of engaging. So the community forum or filing issues on GitHub. There are different ways in which one can engage and participate with the documentation that is managed on Sphinx. So I wanted to just highlight that you and your own communication and your own social ties is also really important for that need for collective curation of the documentation. Again, really briefly, this is just a screenshot of the branch structure for the documentation. And as I mentioned earlier, that the branches on the documentation in our documentation repo mirrors the minor releases of arches. So the semantic versioning that Cyrus just really beautifully illustrated and described for us is mimicked in a lot of ways in the documentation, so that you can easily toggle in Read the Docs different states of the documentation that match the specific version of arches that you need to understand. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of an orientation, how many of you have ever read the Read the Docs documentation for arches? Wonderful, yay. So as you know, there's a lot of, these are the major topics basically at the highest level. So getting started, some guidance for arches administrators and users. There's some guidance around for developers and doing software customization. One of the newest aspects of that is just sort of providing a little bit of a framework, a little bit of background around Arches applications, especially with the release of 7.6 that's coming out soon, as a little bit of a background about how one goes about customizing and extending Arches in more sustainable kinds of ways, so that you're not leaving something that is a maintenance headache for the rest of time. And finally, some more documentation on production deployments, including a bit more updates on cloud deployment, especially on Amazon. So these are some of the major topics, and one of the hard parts about that is, one can't be an expert at everything, right? And so the documentation really needs that collaboration. So I do my best, and when I see a request for something to investigate, try to make it work. But sometimes it takes data. Sometimes you need to deploy a new version, a different version of Arches and things like that. So that is where a lot of work in documentation can't necessarily just be delegated to somebody else. It really needs to be thought of as very integral to software engineering and software development. You need to think about that while you're developing new features, while you're refactoring code. The changes that you're introducing may need changes in documentation. And so while you're doing your pull requests, think about what those pull requests, the implications are for the documentation repo. Because if you're introducing a new feature, nobody's going to use it if they don't know how to activate it or if they don't know how to engage with it. All of those things are actually really critical. So that's where we need to have that effort really widely distributed. And another thing to think about too is that a lot of us engage in multiple open source projects. And are there things that you've learned in the documentation strategies, the way things are organized in other projects that you think could be really invaluable for Arches? And those are the kinds of things that I would love to learn about too. Because the more that you engage with these software projects and in the documentation around them, you may see patterns that you think are really useful, really interesting, something that is really helpful for you that we can use in our own context. And then also, oftentimes if you're working cultural heritage, you're in a very particular institutional kind of a context. You're in in organizations with very particular kinds of missions, different kinds of communities, different kinds of people are using it. We may need not just to adopt the best practices of other open source projects, but we may need to understand how do we actually meet the needs of our own specific communities more effectively too. That again requires feedback and communication from you who are engaged with different parts of that community back to people like me who are engaged with maintaining the documentation. So, lots and lots of needs. Cyrus gave a great overview of some of the development cadence in Arches, which has been kind of breakneck. And so there's always needs to find and update obsolete content, fixing errors and ambiguities, all that kind of thing. There's always need for help with installation. So if you go to the community forum, that's often a really a topic that people come back to over and over again, needing help actually like installing it, even from the very beginning. And of course, customizations and extensions. And one thing at the bottom here is the documentation doesn't have a lot on security good practices, and that's something that we might want to really try to address. So these are just some spitballing, some ideas that we might want to focus on. I talked to some colleagues in advance of this meeting about what they would like to see in terms of help with the documentation. And there are groups who are trying to do some more sort of iterative front-end design work, customization work, and running into issues with like, every time we do it, we have to rerun Webpack, that kind of thing. And it's sort of slow and tedious, slowing them down. Are there ways to managing that? Are there ways that we can make it a little bit more ergonomic for that kind of iterative development? Is there something I could put in the documentation that would help? That would be a really important kind of a thing. And then one of the other concerns, especially as Cyrus was talking about like different versions and sometimes breaking changes, how do we go through that? How do we guide people through breaking changes when we go through major version changes? So those are some interesting kinds of concerns. So again, this is my picture of complicated stuff. So it's all complicated. Arches is a complicated project. It's a very big project. It has been around for a long time. It is meeting needs for a very complicated domain. And really, your experiences and your problem solvings are invaluable. There's really invaluable resources. So when you figure out how some really thorny, annoying issue, somebody else may run into that thorny, annoying issue too, and it's really useful to share some of the tips and ideas about how to make that go. That's where I would really welcome your contributions into the documentation. So, I also wanted to do a special call out to Adam Cox, who's the previous maintainer of the documentation, and again, highlight a few ways to participate. So please do contribute documentation, especially if you're making pull requests into core Arches. also make documentation pull requests, especially for the changes that you're introducing. I may want to ask you to help review pull requests, again, because I can't be an expert in everything, especially front-end stuff, Jesus. I really need people that want to step up to the plate and take a look at some of those things. And again, please do post issues to the documentation repo if you have suggestions or even note that there's an error or an omission. And again, participating in the forum, because I do monitor the forum, and it's a way for me to learn where community needs are around vis-a-vis documentation. So, with that said, I want to thank you all for your time, and thank you for pausing your coffee sipping. And if you have any questions or have anything you'd like to discuss, I'm going to be here for this whole meeting, but now's a good time too, so, for the rest of the group. Yeah, Gail.
This will be, I only have like 20 more questions left today, so bear with me. One thing I've thought about, especially with the minor releases of 7, is would it make sense to put the upgrade path instructions and the release notes into the documentation? It's not that they're particularly hard to find, it's just like, you don't always know, like, should I be going, if I'm on 7.1, should I then go to 7.2 and then do that and then go to 7.3 and do that? It's like, I don't always know what's the shortest path to get to where I want to go. And the documentation's being a home to installation and other sort of technical operations. Would it make sense? Is it feasible? What do people in the room think?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I want to punt that to the rest of the room. I think, I think it's a recurring issue. I think a lot of people would want to see it. So, in terms of like significance, I think it could be an important aspect of the documentation. One nice thing about the documentation too is just even things like search, right? Just having it nicely indexed, so you don't have to. Finding it might be a little bit easier. But yes, it is. These things are typically in the release notes. There may be. There may be considerations that I'm missing here because sometimes there might be a lot of like case specificness. I'm not sure. So, Cyrus, do you have an idea?
Well, it's a challenging thing to do if someone is moving from, say, 7 to 7.2 to 7.5, because when we do a release, we only test the upgrade from the previous feature. And so you're right. There could be, if you're going from 7.2 to 7.5, steps that you don't need to do with each because you only need to run migrate once for the entire series. So it does seem like there might be a place in the documentation because we wouldn't put that entire upgrade path in the release notes. Just the upgrade path from the previous release. And because there would be shortcuts, putting it in the documentation is maybe a good place because there it can be edited and changed if we find that there's a more efficient way to do it, or something wrong with the path. Although that it would be a bit of work because you have to test that upgrade path with each new release to make sure that it's documented properly. So
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. A lot of, some of the prior conversation that you introduced also, Cyrus, about testing. I think that also would play an important role in curating the documentation too. So that making sure that what the instructions in the documentation actually work is a nice thing. So, that's, so the more that we could sort of set ourselves up for making testing easier to do, and maybe distribute that job a little bit more, I think the better, because that would really be useful for the documentation curation too. Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering whether it's worth making the addition of documentation for new features part of like the pull request template. so that if you're submitting something that's sort of large, you also link to the documentation, or you're required to at least start something, because that could form part of the information for the reviewer.
Yes, and I do want to give you a shout out too with Historic England, because you did that with your accessibility work. Yes, we got a very nice PR from you, and we had a very civilized discussion about how one spells color. So. Yeah, but I think that sounds, to me, that sounds like a fabulous idea. Yeah, I mean, it is more work, a little bit more coordination, because now you have 2 PRs and 2 different repos to juggle. But it is, I think it's really important for the documentation to as closely track the state of the software as possible. And if it falls by the wayside, then it really undermines the software project. Yeah, George.
Thanks, Rick. You'll know this, but for everybody else, I'm not actually a developer. I'm not even necessarily developer curious. So my question will go to, you had made a point in one of your slides about talking about the different addressees of the documentation. I know the documentation is already huge and already like a maintenance burden and that sort of thing, but I think that was an interesting point, that there might be like subsections of the documentation that we might consider where, like there's a point where it says for developers, and then it's like, all right, now you're getting into there and you'll see what happens. And it seems like maybe partially developers have like a fuzzy logic intuition and they can jump over a bunch of steps and get somewhere. But there's it might be for like noobs who just want to get this done. This thing first. You might not have thought of also this thing, like spell out all the steps. There might be like, obviously not for everything because it would be an infinite task, but there might be like some key things where people get stuck where, and it's not just noobs, but like, if that's an appropriate term, and sysadmins or something like that, but places where there's just like a slightly different take on what like this everyday task is.
Yeah.
Where rotating the position on the same question might be interesting.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, in some ways, you might want to have like multiple navigation paths to essentially sometimes the same information, but it's sort of more of a sort of role-based or problem-based kind of a thing, rather than the single navigation path that we've offered so far. The one hierarchy, you might want it like a polyhierarchy, I guess. I mean, you lingo people can figure that out. Yeah. So, but yes, I think that's important. I mean, one of the things is that, I think that the installation aspect is something that really could use more love. It always needs more love because a lot of times, yes, Arches is enterprise software, right? It is meant for organizations that have kinds of capabilities and needs beyond typically that of an individual, but it's often individuals who are in organizations who want to play with it to evaluate it first, right? And so reducing that barrier to entry is probably going to be pretty important. So having a really, really, really good, clear recipe to get started is I think going to be an important kind of a thing to think about. Yeah.
My question is about when Arches is interacting with non-Arches software. Where's the installation? In most cases, Elastic, Postgres. Another example would be the bulk data manager. So that requires task management, which requires Celery, which is backed by like Redis or RabbitMQ. So I guess my question is, if we found our own way of configuring all that, we've made a decision to use one of those compatible pieces of software. Is that the kind of thing that could be contributed to the main documentation, like sort of like happy path, or is that almost like too close to making a policy of like, this way it works? You know what I'm saying?
But to me, I think that I would welcome that because I've always been struggling with Celery. So please, yeah. I mean, I think I think providing some examples of what of the way people have solved these particular problems is useful. At the very least, because it gives somebody else that opportunity to go, okay, so here's one pathway that somebody else has actually figured out. I might be able to do that too, or it just, examples are helpful, especially working examples. Sometimes even things like working Apache configurations, working Nginx configurations, stuff like that matters, right? Because then you see something that actually has been worked in some place, and it gives you a starting place, right? Then it reduces this number of lookups and Stack Exchange for yourself. Yeah.
I was wondering if you can say what's the thought process behind into which languages is the software being translated into?
The transifex? I don't have a huge background in that. Maybe Dennis, do you want to talk about how the translations and localizations are being managed? Some are institutionally sponsored, right? And then
there is a transifex. There's a transifex project for Arches that translates applications into multiple languages. I'm actually not sure if we translate the documentation into multiple languages.
Not yet.
So
No,
is that your question, the
possible.
documentation?
No, it was more about the actual software, actual program once people get into. I saw the Hebrew is completed.
Yeah.
Chart, just kind of.
Yeah, so that's a place where you can manage translations into multiple languages for a particular Arches application. Like you can imagine there are strings that are default strings in Arches, those need to be translated. And then there are strings that are what we call dynamic strings that are related to your graphs that need to be translated as well. So both of those things are supported in transifex and it's meant for the community to jump in. But Alexei is giving me the eye. He's got something more to say.
Sorry. I mean, if I'm understanding your question, which was why those languages, maybe. Well, I'll answer that question whether you asked it or not. The answer to that question that you didn't ask was mostly people just stepped up and said, can we translate Arches into our language because we're interested in that? And I said, yeah, of course, be my guest. And that's really been community driven. And the reason that Urdu is in 100% translated is because somebody said, I want to do this, and really shepherded that process. I mean, I don't speak Urdu, and so it's totally up to them. And I can't even QA, so it really is up to them to kind of, be the ones that drive that process. And it's kind of an ongoing maintenance process as well, because just as we continue to develop, new strings get added, some get deleted, and it really is up to the community to kind of keep that going forward. And so that's the answer to the question you didn't ask. Did you have anything else about that, or that I cannot answer? No? Okay. Yeah. Yes, we did want to showcase that, and I think we reached out. Maybe we already had people kind of working with us, doing maybe development, in fact, and so they approached us, and we approached for right to left. Yeah. So sure.
So this actually, I think, comes back to a point that Eric was making earlier, and a lot of that community-driven translation was done by non-developers. It was end users mostly, and honestly, a lot of them were Arcadia-funded projects who are working in these regions. So this is a really good example of full circle, like the developers making the software, doing the documentation, users then taking the baton and saying, okay, now we're going to make this fit for purpose in Uzbekistan. Junaid? Yeah, he's.
Is documentation translated?
Currently, no, but the capability exists.
Using
Yeah.
like Google Translate, like built into Chrome, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could do that, yeah, because I mean, it's a web page, right? Yeah, but the Sphinx would support parallel texts in different languages. Yeah, we would need more curation on, obviously linguistic experts to be able to help with that. But it would be a nice welcome development. That's a great sign of success, too. Okay, anybody else? Again, we'll be talking about this more, but please do think about, keep that in your back pocket. How am I going to document that? When you're talking about the kinds of things that you want to do here for sprints and whatnot, for hackathoning. Okay? Thank you all.